In the year 2030 in the Republic of South Korea, an operation had begun with the goal of destroying the communication tower. There only bodies and destruction can be seen. A person is sitting, all injured, but they appear not to be doing very well. The man calls out for his friend Hyun-sung. Also wounded, he asks the boy if he's okay. His situation is quite critical. At the same time, he questions why he hasn't died yet, since he is in so much pain. Hyun takes out a device and gives it to him. A song plays through the earphones, and then he says he feels much better now. Soon he asks what Hyun will do when he dies, as he will probably be bored. The man stands still to think for a moment, and then he responds that he is right. The boy says that this song makes him feel calm. Hyun says that when he goes to heaven, he has to make sure to find the idol groups. With little strength left, the boy smiles, questioning why he would care about that. Before passing, he tells the man to survive no matter what. Hyun looks back, but his friend had already died. He decides to move forwards, so that his death is not in vain. Out of the corner of his eye, a background character and his team observe a monster. They run toward the creature shooting, but it remains undefeated. The men realize that they have inflicted any damage. The creature prepares to attack, and they notice this. At an astonishing speed, the monster charges at them. As if it were nothing, that bizarre thing cuts through everyone. No one who attacked survived. A man screams into the radio, telling his leader that the bullets aren't penetrating it. Furthermore, the troops are dying one by one. The gate opens and Hyun looks at the monster. He immediately orders everyone to stop shooting. Then he moves toward the creature. With extreme speed, he gets as close as possible. His agility is high, so he manages to catch the monster off guard. But the creature's reflex is quick, and it manages to block the strike. Hyun is pushed back but doesn't give up. Soon he counterattacks with greater force than before. Several blue sparks appear after hitting the monster. It begins to darken, but this is just a distraction. Hyun realizes this and quickly retreats. It turned out he was hit by the attack. Everyone shouts for their leader, but he tells the creature that it's over now. At that moment, the monster is defeated. Walking, Hyun gives orders to plant bombs because a war is going to start in 5 minutes. The man says that the portal is opening and it seems an alien is trying to escape. He then asks that after planting the bomb, everyone leaves. This leaves most of them confused. Hyun orders them to go quickly. We see an alien complaining about something. Our hero asks if the creature is fleeing to the headquarters. Hyun arrives and questions if that is also a transport device. The bizarre creature smiles. Then it starts laughing, saying that this planet will definitely be here soon. Moving towards them to attack, the protagonist states that they have been saying that for over 10 years. The blow hits him directly, but a barrier protected him. Still, Hyun keeps attacking, until the moment the barrier breaks. He asks the alien to keep laughing. Hyun says he's going to tell a story that happened 3 years ago. Once he managed to capture one of them that was killing humans. That day it begged to live. That's when he realized he could win against them. A powerful blow is directed at the enemy. With that, the barrier is destroyed. Like a madman, the protagonist says that this view is beautiful. That expression of fear and terror is priceless. Immediately after, he rips off the alien's arm. Someone says that the portal is opening. Without leaving room for a counterattack, Hyun grabs it. While holding it, he says to tell its friends in hell. The bomb's countdown reaches 0. Soon a great explosion occurs. The entire tower is engulfed in fire. Looking up, the soldiers only think of their captain. Hyun says it feels like his body is disintegrating, and a background voice says that he really did it. This leaves him quite confused. The monster starts screaming, and then disappears into the air. Little by little, the protagonist's body begins to vanish. Hyun says that even being a great captain, he will die in such a pathetic way. After that, for some reason, he awakens. The boy ended up in a completely unknown place. His arms and legs are no longer disappearing. At this moment, he questions what happened, and why he's in this mysterious room. Hyun gets out of bed to check for himself, because this scenario is very strange. Besides this oddness, the boy feels his body heavy. For now, his priority is to check his health. Ahead, he sees a mirror. Then he is surprised to realize that everything had changed. After all, this is not his body. This leaves him scared and questioning if this is some kind of experiment. Judging by the interior, the place looks like a medieval castle. Our boy goes to the window to look outside. There he observes soldiers in armor. And then he pauses to think. Their armor is different from what he had seen before. Hyun is confused and says that if it's a trick, he won't be fooled. A sword and shield are on the wall. The boy goes to grab them and says he got lucky. When he tried to pick them up, he noticed something. The sword is too heavy for him. This makes him furious because his previous body would have lifted it easily. With no other option, the protagonist grabs a small dagger. Next, to understand the situation, he checks his surroundings. Since his body is weak, his security is compromised. Opening the door to his room, he encounters a gigantic soldier. Immediately, Hyun questions whether he can defeat him, but he notices there's practically an army there. The pressure was so great the protagonist almost fainted. With a very frightening face, the man shouts, showing respect to his lord. Everyone there kneels. Of course, because of this, the boy's head becomes confused, as seemingly strong people are bowing to him. Approaching, the protagonist asks the man what's going on there, who he is or what this castle is. The man replies that he is the lord. Our boy says that's not what he's asking. He wants to know his name. The soldier doesn't quite understand but says he is Ayn al-Baron. At first glance, this makes him thoughtful. But his thoughts are interrupted when the man carries him to the bed like a princess. He says he is happy that his lord has awakened, because he was worried the boy wouldn't wake up again. Hyun questions if in this life he is a sickly lord. With alien technology, he doesn't doubt that he may have been thrown into this world. They could have turned him into a weapon and created a virtual reality to distract him. So if that's the case, they use the fantasy genre. Still, he hopes that if this is a game, it's not a yaw. The soldier gets up and goes to the door, saying he's going to bring the doctor. Outside the room, two people discuss the lord's condition. Apparently, both take advantage of the boy, and if he dies, it would be difficult to gain more benefits. The old man says it's better to do everything in moderation. His colleague states it's better to buy 2 carriages of gold before the territory collapses. And the best thing to do is to hide the gold, while the old man says the security captain wouldn't let that happen. After all, a knight is an honest being, not a corrupt one. The fat man asks if he's being called corrupt. Calmly, the old man says that for now, it's better to just observe the situation. A maid approaches the two. Getting close to the man, she gives a warning about our boy. He orders her to keep watching. The fat man says the medicine given to the lord is working effectively. After the conversation, both leave, saying this is good news. With the protagonist, the doctor is examining him. In his thoughts, Hyun says that so far he hasn't felt any danger. Maybe at that moment, something went wrong with the teleportation. And if that's the case, he'll have to live the rest of his life in this body. The protagonist asks the doctor's name. He replies that it's Nakarmo, and adds that he's been in charge of the boy's health for the past few years. Because of these questions and inquiries, the man thinks Hyun has memory loss. And then he says it could have been caused by the high fever. The soldier arrives, saying that the treasurer and the administrator have arrived. The people from before enter the protagonist's room. The man kneels, showing respect to the lord. He soon says that seeing his energetic face, his worries have disappeared. The fat man adds that he gave him medicine that's hard to obtain when the boy fell into a coma, and that's why he must have improved so much. Hyun thanks him for his generosity, but inside, he just wishes to be let go. The protagonist says he has a big problem. Since he woke up, his memories are a bit blurred, so he doesn't remember him. After hearing this, the man becomes desperate and introduces himself as Tommen. Angrily, he asks if the doctor made him an idiot, and orders the man to tell him everything. The boy watches the situation. And meanwhile, in his subconscious, Nose says that something is wrong. Hyun asks Tommen to calm down, since the doctor is his savior, and even though he lost his memory, it was he who saved him when he was on the brink of death. The doctor bows and thanks him for his benevolence. Gun says that from now on, he will ask many questions, and the man tells him he can ask whatever he wants. Behind his good-natured expression, Tommen thinks that now it will be easier than before to deceive the boy. Nose calls his lord's attention, saying that there is something he must urgently decide. It is the order to recruit mercenaries. The boy asks what that is. Nose explains that it is to recruit mercenaries in his name. Hyun says he knows that but asks why they are recruiting. He replies that it is to subdue the monsters that kill the livestock and harm the products. Somewhat embarrassed, the boy asks if there is a demon king. Apparently, the man doesn't understand the question. Returning to the focus of the conversation, Nose says that the subjugation occurs every 5 years. In his thoughts, Hyun says that he doesn't even know what is happening, so he lacks confidence in making such an important decision. Our boy was about to accept the hiring of mercenaries, but in desperation, Tommen interrupts him. He says that the lord cannot decide so hastily since the territory's finances are in bad shape. Therefore, he should reconsider this decision because hiring hundreds of mercenaries will cost a fortune. Confused, the protagonist asks if the situation is that bad. Reluctantly, Tommen says it is possible to hire them, but they still don't know what might happen in the territory in the future, so they can't waste money like this. Our boy thinks about this for a moment, and then says that the monsters are attacking people and killing the livestock as well as harming the products. Stoichi questions if the fat man wants him to wait and watch his people being massacred. Already sweating, Tommen says that everyone is part of the resistance, so there won't be many casualties. Besides, monsters are like natural disasters. They can only blame God for their deaths. The protagonist asks if he is the person who manages the money. Suddenly grabbing him by the collar, the people around them are confused. But the soldier notices a change in his lord. Even the fat man sees that something is different. Angrily, Hyun says that he will never abandon his people. If he turns his back on them, who in the world will protect his territory besides him? With such words, the three are impressed. Looking at the administrator, the protagonist asks him to recruit the mercenaries immediately. Nose immediately obeys the order. Both leave the boy's room. Tommen is furious, saying how that brat dares to act like this. Laughing, the old man says that before he was flattering the boy. Still, it doesn't matter. He then asks Tommen to prepare the budget estimate for the recruitment. Elsewhere, we see several dishes of food on a table. Our boy devours everything. His soldier and butler watch him, and Hyun asks what's wrong. Answering the question, he says that the boy is eating more than usual. Stretching his arm, the boy says he needs nutrients since he just woke up from a coma. The two don't understand the meaning of these words. Handing over the plate, the protagonist says that it's very tasty and asks if there's more. Happily, the butler says it's lamb soup and then promises to get more for him. Leaving the room, the soldier stays to watch the boy. Hyun asks if Rondo doesn't want to eat as well. He declines, saying he's fine. Pointing at him, Hyun says it's strange to be watched while eating. The soldier turns away as if that's the problem. Our boy sighs a little. With a dark look, he says he won't repeat himself 3 times. Immediately, the soldier begins to sweat. Having no choice, he decides to sit in the chair. He doesn't start eating or anything like that. But Hyun says that the meat is good and asks him to take a taste. As if it were an order, Rondo serves himself. Both agree that the meat is of high quality. Grabbing the wine glass, the protagonist says that the soldier needs to eat to be able to protect him. The boy asks if there are few soldiers since they have to recruit mercenaries. Rondo replies that there are 300 soldiers, half of whom protect the castle, while the other half fight the bandits alongside the security captain. This makes the boy curious. He continues saying that the bandits raid the villages, and by the Lord's order, the security captain took some soldiers to the area. Hyun asks when he will return, and Rondo replies that he doesn't know because of the large number of bandits. But he asks his lord not to worry since the security captain is the greatest swordsman in the kingdom. This makes him feel reassured, so he asks for the individual's name. His name is Charlene Depor. The captain is surrounded by several bandits. A guy mocks him for leaving the royal knights to serve in the Albaran fields. The man just observes the insults. But to madman, the bandit says this is his chance, because now he'll be recognized as the greatest warrior on the continent if he defeats him. Charlene doesn't move a muscle. Shortly after, both charge at each other. The bandits have crossbows and prepare to shoot. Charlene quickly notices this. Abruptly, he halts his movements, and with the greatest ease he cuts the arrows. The bandit thinks he has found an opening, and immediately attacks him with his axe. Judging by the captain's expression, he doesn't feel any difficulty in defending himself. As if it were nothing, he throws the enemy far away. One of the bandits orders everyone to reload their crossbows. Next to him, a woman with silver hair calls them cowards. The man retorts, saying that this is teamwork, because they all live and have always lived together, even if they die for it. The woman tries to help, but the captain stops her, saying he'll fight alone, since he has never seen such a beautiful friendship coming from such thieves. The bandit says that he is a man of loyalty, not someone like him who grovels before the nobles. Raising his sword, Charlene sighs, and then says that their death wish will be granted. The brilliant aura surrounds the sword. Laughing, the bandit says he is finally showing his true abilities, but claims he is not the only one capable of using force. After saying this, something catches his attention. Beyond the aura, a killing intent is emitted. Placing her hand in front, the woman tells the soldiers to step back, because it's all over now. The sword is the same color as the moonlight. An overwhelming power shows why his title is the strongest swordsman in the kingdom. With monstrous power, the bandit trembles in fear. Wasting no time, he orders his comrades to fire. They all shoot their crossbows, but apparently it's already the end of everything. With just a swing of his sword, the bandits are cut down without being able to react. As if by magic, their imminent death arrives. Before falling, the bandit calls him a monster. After the battle, the last ones standing are the captain and his soldiers. At the castle, the doctor is preparing a potion to recover the protagonist's memories. Tommen is suspicious if this will really work. The doctor assures him that this will help with the recovery, although he can't guarantee that his previous personality will return. Looking around the place, he asks if this was the old wine cellar. The doctor responds that yes, and it was the Lord who turned it into a pharmacy. Tommen starts talking nonsense, saying that the expensive bottles seem to have diminished a lot, so he hopes he isn't using them for medicinal purposes. Suddenly, the fat man lunges at the doctor and quickly immobilizes him. His head is close to the cauldron. Tommen says that the doctor better make the protagonist return to what he was before if he doesn't want to become part of the potion. He has to recover his memories somehow, or leave him half dead. The doctor's daughter arrives talking about the lizard tail. Tommen has a smug expression. Leaving the place, he tells them to keep up the hard work, and then repeats that the Lord must return to what he was before. The door quickly closes and the atmosphere becomes tense. The doctor seems to be angry and his daughter questions what happened. His veins bulge out, then he throws the cauldron to the floor. Grabbing another, he orders Linda to bring a volcanic centipede. The girl doesn't understand his sudden behavior, but her father tells her to hurry up and get it. Linda says the centipede doesn't react well to the Lord's body. The doctor shouts at his daughter to just bring it. With no other choice, she goes to fetch it. Unknowing, she hands the volcanic centipede to her father. The doctor says he wants to see if the situation will improve the way Tommen wants. The next day at the castle, the medicine is being delivered to the protagonist. Linda says the centipede will concentrate a lot of heat, and thus his body will develop. Hyun asks who the woman is. The doctor replies that she is his daughter. The girl kneels, questioning if the Lord doesn't remember her, because they used to talk frequently before. Our boy feels embarrassed by her sudden closeness. Looking at the medicine, Hyun asks if this will improve his body. The doctor quickly confirms that it will. The girl warns that if the antibodies reject the medicine, it could be lethal, but the protagonist says it's okay. Holding the container in his hand, the boy becomes pensive because with such a weak body, it's difficult to act as a lord, and at any moment he could die. For a moment, the protagonist becomes suspicious of something. Perhaps this doctor is trying to poison him. After all, his daughter had warned earlier that it could be lethal. And looking closely, she seems very concerned about his health. Even after thinking all this, the damn man drinks it, saying he'll only know what will happen once he takes it. Both are anxious about the situation. After drinking, his expression doesn't look good at all. The doctor asks how he is. At that moment, Hyun almost vomits. The doctor approaches to help him. Linda says that perhaps the medicine is not compatible with the protagonist's body. Before he vomits, he covers his mouth. Then he asks if anyone there has something sweet. His soldier arrives, asking what's happening. Our boy was going to say that he was fine, but his hand starts to feel strange. An indescribable pain shoots through his entire body. Everyone rushes to support him. Rondo asks why he's acting this way. The doctor says that the Lord took the centipede medicine and that his body may not have reacted well. At that moment, the soldier realizes that this is the same medicine that made him faint before. Linda says he needs to vomit. Our boy grabs his hand, saying that he's fine. Still, the pain is excruciating. She says they need to lower his body temperature. Rondo picks up the boy and takes him to the bathroom. The two also follow. Hyun is placed in the bathtub. Half-dazed, he asks if her name is Linda, and then she responds that it is. The boy asks if the medicine will work and Linda confirms, but she didn't know the medicine would have such a reaction. Rondo asks if the Lord will be okay, and the doctor replies that what's left now is to wait for the temperature to drop. The situation is complicated and night falls. A servant brings ice for the protagonist. She pours it into the boy's bathtub. Hyun says he doesn't feel as bad now thanks to her. Linda says it's her fault he's like this. Without showing concern, the protagonist says he'll endure it. With a smile, the girl says her Lord has changed because before he would only complain. All the time he acted pathetically and unstable since he was going through tough times. Linda realizes she was rude and apologizes, but the boy says it's fine, since thanks to her, his body improved. She was going to check his temperature with her hands, but they are cold because of the ice. Immediately afterwards, she asks for permission and measures the boy's temperature with her forehead. The boy blushes at this sudden gesture. Linda says he's better now so he can get out of the water. But then she notices that his temperature has risen again and asks if Hyun is okay. The boy replies that he is, but he's just a little cold. A new day arrives at the Albaran castle. The girls stay by the protagonist's side all night. Her eyes slowly open. After waking up, she notices her lord's absence. Immediately, she stands up, shouting that Hyun has disappeared. He appears behind her, asking if she needs him. His stomach growls since he spent the day and night without eating anything. He then asks if the girl wants to have breakfast with him. Elsewhere in Tommen's castle, a hooded man arrives and says he's there to visit him. The servants let him pass. Tommen welcomes him and calls him Zeradin. The man sits down and brings the news that the Lord is well and healthy. This relieves the fat man since it would be difficult to bribe another Lord. Still, there's definitely something wrong, because the Lord seems like a different person. Zeradin doesn't quite understand. Tommen explains the whole situation, that before he hadn't listened to his advice, and even ignored him and hired the mercenaries. The man says that if this continues, Tommen's influence over the kingdom will decrease. The best thing to do now is to follow the plan. Make the Lord sick again. Tommen adds that the boy will suffer but not die. Laughing, Zeradin says they won't have any problems if they leak him alive. Both laugh at the devious plan. The fat man says everything will go as planned. On the same day at the protagonist's castle, a butler is taking his measurements. He comments that the boy has grown a lot since yesterday. Hyun asks if the tailoring will have to be redone. He responds that he'll make his clothes big to leave room for the Lord to grow. A while later, the two leave the place. The protagonist greets the people around him. Passing by an unfamiliar place, Hyun asks what room this is and his butler says it's an office. The boy wastes no time and enters, but the people nearby try to stop him. It turned out he managed to get in. Our boy asks why no one cleans this place. Somewhat uncomfortable, the butler says that the protagonist ordered this room to be demolished. Sitting on the bed, Hyun asks him to continue. The butler then says that this is the place where the former lord died. This surprises the boy a little, since it's strange to die in such a place. Rondo states that his father was assassinated. The boy tries to mask his reaction since he doesn't remember anything. His soldier says that the former lord was found dead on the desk where Hyun is sitting now. Pulling back the cloth, there's still a bit of blood left. The protagonist asks who killed him, but Rondo responds that he doesn't know, and then realizes that something so disastrous happened, which makes our boy understand why the former owner of the body ordered the place to be destroyed, especially since he was suddenly thrust into the position of lord. The soldier keeps watching the protagonist. He moves toward the window to see the beautiful nature outside. Several houses are nestled in the forest. Looking at the mountain, Hyun makes a decision. He then calls the butler, Chamberlain, and orders him to turn this place into his bedroom. Both are surprised by the decision. Smiling, the protagonist says he can easily see the village from there. Sukulin trusts this task to him. Sometime later, the maids are already tidying up the place. Tommen arrives and questions what's going on. The woman says that the Lord ordered this place to be his bedroom from now on. The man thinks the boy has gone mad. Everyone starts rushing since the Lord will sleep there tonight. The girl approaches Vicente and warns him that Tommen has arrived at the scene, so he goes to greet him. The fat man still doesn't understand what all this is about. Vicente also doesn't know how to explain. The only reason he heard is that the Lord said he could see the village from this room. Tommen notes that perhaps the boy has taken an interest in his own territory. The cold, silent night arrives at the castle. Our boy is training his body. After all, he's still weak. The butler arrives and says that the doctor's daughter has come to see him. He orders her to be let in. Linda asks if her lord called for her. Observing the protagonist, she says he's gotten taller. Hyun questions why Linda is just standing there. Ignoring this, she says she has something to ask. She then hands him a paper, and he reads that it's about the recruitment of mercenaries. Hyun says that this is the report on the expenses and budgets necessary for the recruitment, but this confuses the girl. Our boy explains that he lost his memory, so he can't stamp a document without knowing what's written on it. Linda begins to understand her lord's point of view. His decision is to trust her with reading the report because he doesn't want anyone to know that he can't read. Even amidst doubts, Linda agrees. Cam gets excited, saying that he called the right person for the job. Uncomfortable, the girl asks if he knows what place this is. The protagonist replies that he's heard about it. She asks him to be careful because people call this room the cursed room. This surprises the boy because he didn't know such a rumor was circulating. Linda says that 3 people have already died in this room, and all of them were lords of the Alberon family and were also assassinated. Fear is written all over the protagonist's face. Linda becomes a little worried. Like at the beginning of a horror movie, Hyun says that it's just a coincidence, and that this room being called cursed means nothing to him. The girl says that's just her opinion and then leaves, saying that his Kavarnia lessons start tomorrow. The boy sighs a bit, then says that this rumor is total nonsense. Hours later, he goes to sleep to recharge his energy. But his peace is interrupted by a nightmare. The memories of his past life torment him. His last moments with the alien for some reason cause severe pain. His former body being torn apart frightens him. Then he wakes up, sweating profusely. Relieved to have escaped the nightmare, he says he shouldn't have asked to change rooms. Our boy gets out of bed, saying it's really a bit scary. There was a saying that if you sleep with a knife under your pillow, you can avoid sleep paralysis. Still trembling, he says it doesn't hurt to try. For a brief moment, Hyun looks out the window, and then goes over to it and opens it, saying that this night view is beautiful. After all, in his past life, he hardly ever had the opportunity to enjoy anything. Suddenly, something appears and catches the protagonist's attention. A carriage surrounded by Manx arrives. Hyun says this is strange. He then questions who these people are, because he doesn't think they are his soldiers. The men are transporting something mysterious inside a box. When the boy realizes something is wrong, he uses a teleportation spell to get to the location. He arrives there quickly, startling the nearby soldier, who shouts, asking who he is, and demands that he identify himself. The protagonist doesn't know what to say, especially since he's surrounded, and it's definitely a dangerous situation. Without wasting time, he identifies himself as Lord Alberon. The soldiers are confused because Alberon is known to be constantly ill. One of the men tells everyone not to be fooled, saying the Lord is like a living corpse and never leaves his bed. No one hesitates, and soon they emit a killing intent. Our boy realizes things have gotten complicated. One of them attacks, but luckily the protagonist manages to defend himself. The knife he intended to put under his pillow is with him. Using techniques and skills from his past life, he pushes the soldier back. Hyun tries to say that this is a misunderstanding and that he really is the Lord, but the man doesn't listen and shouts, asking how he dares to brandish a knife against the Knights of Hapasha. Raising the item, the boy says he didn't even draw it. The man orders him to stop with the nonsense and then commands everyone to kill him. Things get tight for the protagonist. Even so, he does his best to fend them off. But because of his weak body, he can't do much. A sword nearly hits him, but he manages to dodge. Inside the broken box, Hyun glimpses gold coins, but he ignores them because his goal now is to survive. Again, he narrowly avoids being killed. With the help of the carriage, he dodges and then climbs on top of it. He soon realizes that teleporting was a bad idea. A soldier strikes his left hand. He looks around but sees that he's surrounded. Looking up, he spots someone who can help. Rondo is there, watching and patrolling the area. The boy tries to shout, but his voice doesn't reach him. With no other option, he tries to teleport again, especially since the soldiers are already climbing onto the carriage. Gathering his last spark of energy, the protagonist manages to escape with only a scratch. He lands behind his soldier. When the soldier sees him, he's confused and immediately asks how on earth his lord got there. Exhausted, Hyun questions what those men are doing at the dock. Rondo hadn't seen anyone there, and the boy informs him that they are from Hapasha. His soldier says those soldiers belong to the territory of the great Lord Banin, and ignoring that, Hyun asks what those men are doing. Rondo replies that once or twice a year they come to collect the debts owed by the previous lord. This enrages the protagonist as he almost died without knowing he had debts. His soldier finds it strange as Tommen was supposed to have informed him, and then the boy says that man is a scoundrel. Cotton says this has gone too far. Without hesitation, he orders Rondo to summon Tommen, who questions if he's really going to summon him at this hour. With a serious tone, Hyun says there's nothing wrong with summoning his own subordinate. Leaving the blood-stained knife on the table, He looks at his hand to see if it's still intact. We realize that his teleportation ability wasn't intentional. The boy finds all of this very strange, but for now there's nothing he can do. And it might even be a side effect of the teleportation machine. There are too many unanswered questions, so he decides to leave it for later. For now, he needs to stay calm. But then he bangs on the table, shouting that the Hapashas had the nerve to wound him in his own territory. Trying to take advantage of the situation, he says that perhaps Lord Bonin will reduce the debt if he proves he was attacked. Looking at his hand, he wonders if it would be rude to wake Linda to tend to his wound. At Tommen's mansion, we see that even a fat man knows how to enjoy life. Sometime later, the man is angry about being summoned at this hour. He leaves complaining that he only keeps the boy alive because he's useful. But if the protagonist becomes useless, he'll cut off his head without a second thought. The carriage heads to the castle in the middle of the night. Upon arriving, the butler urges Tommen to hurry, as he should run when his lord calls him. With that 15-meter run, the fat man loses about 2 kilos, and climbing the stairs another 3. The man is so exhausted that in his mind, he's only thinking about killing him. Opening the door to the room, he makes his reverence. Our boy asks him to sit down, then says he was about to sleep, but something won't leave his mind. What is the size of his father's debt? Tommen asks if this is the reason he was summoned, and the protagonist responds that he needs to know this to make some plans. Looking in his notebook, Tommen says that the debt is over 400,000 gold coins. Han comments on how much they pay the soldiers, which is about 2 gold coins for regular soldiers. Tommen asks if all of his lord's questions have been answered. With a crooked look, the protagonist asks if they've only paid 50,000 gold coins in 3 years of debt. At that moment, the man panics, saying that to pay that amount, they even had to cut basic expenses. The protagonist asks what their sources of income are, and Tommen replies that it's the tax from more than 172 villages, plus the merchants. But even with the income from the mines, only 20,000 gold coins are left each year. Han notes that none of this makes sense because if that's the case, the debt will last for decades. Tommen tries to change the subject to leave, but the boy asks why his father was in debt. The man asks if his memories have returned, and he denies it, saying that Rondo told him. Tommen explains that every year there is a deer hunt organized by Bonin to create connections with other lords, which also serves as a place for betting. In short, all this debt came from gambling. This leaves Hyun disappointed with his supposed father, and he then asks if no one bothered to stop him. The man responds that the boy was also there. The surprise is so great that he ends up spitting out his wine. Grabbing a cloth to wipe his mouth, he asks if there is any way to pay off the debt faster. Tommen suggests selling the mines and doubling the taxes. If they do that, the debt could be paid off in a few years. The protagonist says that doing so won't generate any profit. Getting a little agitated, Tommen says it's best to focus on the present since the longer they wait, the more they'll have to pay. Our boy notices his intentions, so he changes the subject because continuing won't lead anywhere. Tommen asks his lord not to think too much about it and just sell the mines. Hyun says he doesn't like the idea, so they can talk about the situation another time. Calmly, Tommen agrees but asks if the lord is going to double the citizens' taxes. Swirling his wine glass, Hyun says it would be easier to cut his salary in half, which frightens Tommen. Seeing his reaction, the protagonist says that even Tommen wouldn't like his money being cut in half, so he won't raise taxes. Nevertheless, Tommen tries to convince the boy to try to pay off the debt. With little patience, he bangs the glass on the table, telling Tommen to find a solution, and the man complains. But Hyun says that if this continues, he'll find someone else to manage the finances. In his thoughts, Tommen says he can't take it anymore. The protagonist asks why Tommen has that grim look on his face, and immediately he apologizes. Sitting down again, Hyun asks him to find another solution to the debt by tomorrow. After the conversation, Tommen leaves, and in a fit of rage, he says he'll make him regret it. After such a turbulent night, the protagonist goes to sleep. In the corner where his desk is, his knife begins to emit a dark glow. This activates his instincts and makes him wake up. He gets up, saying that someone is there. So he runs towards the knife. But red eyes appear across the blade. A figure shrouded in shadows emerges. She asks the protagonist if he can see her. Already stressed, the boy asks if he can have a single day of peace. 10 years ago, something astonishing happened. Beings from another world invaded Earth, and because of this, everything changed. Our boy joined the military and fought against the biological weapons of those beings. When he had the chance to invade their base, he was caught by a malfunctioning teleportation device. Soon, he ended up in a world where magic exists. And on top of that, he reincarnated into the body of a sickly lord. Just recently, he teleported while fighting a soldier, and as if that wasn't enough, now there's a ghost in front of him. The soldiers arrive to protect him, and meanwhile, that shadow says she's not an enemy. Frightened, the boy asks if Rondo can see it, and he asks if it's the dagger. Cam realizes that no one can see her, and the ghost says she's been trapped in this item for years because she was imprisoned by a mage, and this is the first time a human has noticed her. His soldier asks if he should call it doctor, but the protagonist refuses, saying he's going to rest now. The shadow says she's been watching him, and then he introduces himself as the greatest swordsman of the nation, and his name is Blanzor. He became curious about Hyun when he saw that he had entered the body of the lord. After hearing this, the protagonist becomes interested in the conversation. He quickly asks if Dronzer knows why he was summoned, and he responds that he does not. But the ghost says he saw him being teleported. The boy stands up and asks if he at least knows something about it, but Dronzer replies that he does not. Lying back down on the bed, Hyun asks Dronzer to let him rest since nothing seems important, but the shadow insists that the protagonist listen. With no other choice, Hyun asks what the hell the ghost wants. Dronzer says that even though he's trapped in the dagger, he wants to complete the mission the Emperor left him. Our boy sighs a bit, and then says he'll listen. The shadow explains that the Emperor gave him 2 missions. The first is to assassinate the dark mage Hakro Bediemen, and the second is to retrieve the dragon's eye. Hyun questions what this item is that was stolen. Dronzer says it's the eye of an ancient dragon that disappeared long ago, but part of its power still existed and was sealed in the dagger. The Emperor who wanted it imprisoned is dead, and his empire has fallen. This item cannot fall into human hands and must be destroyed. Our boy asks if he has any idea where the eye might be, and the ghost responds that it should be buried with the dark mage. His body is located in the territory of Hapasha. The protagonist thinks about the matter but concludes that it's too risky, so he asks Dronzer to forget about it. Dronzer says that if Hyun helps him, he will teach him the Emperor's sword art. This way, the boy will become the greatest swordsman on Earth. Being honest, Hyun says he's not interested in mastering the sword. After all, he's a lord and he can simply find someone to fight for him. Besides, he already has the greatest swordsman in the kingdom as his subordinate. Angrily, the ghost asks who it is, and the boy replies that it's Charlene Depor. Dronzer warns that this man is the one who assassinated the former lord. Elsewhere, we see Charlene standing before a sea of bodies. A woman approaches him, calling him chief. She informs him that the bandits killed all the hostages, even the old and the adults, and on top of that, they managed to escape to Lobalong. She suggests that they return to the castle to avoid a confrontation with another territory. Charlene doesn't seem pleased with this news. He then mounts his course, saying they will pursue the bandits. Thus, he will show the world what happens to those who mess with Albaran. In another location with the bandits, they have just arrived in Lobalong. One of his subordinates says it's impossible for the knights to have followed them. The leader says that if Albaran invades this territory, the Lobalong will quickly send troops to fight them off for invasion. He adds that Charlene would be an idiot to follow them. Unfortunately for them, Charlene has just arrived, along with his entire cavalry. The leader is surprised because he didn't expect this. The woman orders everyone to shoot. Several arrows are launched while Charlene draws his sword. One by one, the bandits start falling. They call for help from their chief, but he can't do anything. Even in fear, the leader asks how they dare do such a thing, and declares that he will kill Charlene first. Charlene kicks the shield. His strength is so great that with just that, he knocks the bandit to the ground. He continues to stomp on the man while he's down. The entire area is being overrun by his soldiers. Charlene asks why the scum killed even the hostages. The bandit starts laughing and says he's not a rat, and will do anything to remain the boss. Standing over the man, the knight says that since that's the case, his fate will be the same as his friend's. He is soon pierced by Charlene's blade. Charlene says that he also has a reputation to maintain. Back at the protagonist's castle in the morning, Linda is teaching him the writing of that place. Our boy writes to practice his handwriting. Then he hands the paper to her, asking if it's good. Smiling, she asks if Hyun will be able to learn to pronounce those 32 letters by the next lesson. Clever as always, the protagonist asks if Linda will reward him if he does, because students need a bit of motivation to do their best. The girl says she doesn't know what would please him. Being straightforward, Hyun says she could grant him just one wish. Innocently, Linda agrees, saying it doesn't seem like a bad idea, since he's working hard to make Albaran a better place. With eyes shining, he says that this is a promise. For some reason, the girl sighs in relief. Linda says she was afraid that her lord would turn into a different person when he woke up from the coma. That's why she's relieved that Hyun remains an adorable person. Hearing this makes the protagonist quite happy. A bit embarrassed by having said those things, the girl excuses herself, saying she has a patient to attend to. She then reminds him to memorize all the pronunciations by tomorrow. She leaves and Hyun asks her to take care. We see that the protagonist is quite smitten, and he wonders if Linda likes him too. Suddenly, a shadow appears behind Hyun. This scares him a lot. With a murderous aura, Charlene watches him, and without mercy, he slices him in half. Blood splatters all over the room. But all of this, including the conversation with Linda, was a dream. In front of him, the girl looks concerned. She asks if he slept well, and Hyun replies that he went to bed late last night. Linda says that her lord should have a healthy routine, so he shouldn't wander around. After all, he's already been injured. The boy says he wants to ask a question. She tells him that her lord can ask whatever he wants. His question is whether people like him. This leaves her a bit puzzled, but Hyun explains that he needs to know this to have a better understanding of the territory. The protagonist looks at her face and already senses the answer. Linda apologizes for not being able to help. Her suggestion to change this is to stop raising taxes every year, especially because those who can't pay are enslaved. Hyun gets angry because he didn't know this was happening. The girl says it's not his fault, but rather Tommen and Gnosis, though it was still he who allowed it to happen. After learning this, the protagonist feels great frustration because of him, many people became slaves. Holding his hand, Linda asks Hyun not to blame himself. At the time, his father was killed and he had no one to lean on. She then asks her lord to calm down. And the protagonist shouts, asking how on earth the debt hasn't been paid off even with such high taxes. Our boy looks to the side and realizes he was a bit insensitive in front of Linda. Returning to the conversation, he says that last night Tommen suggested doubling the taxes. Immediately, the girl tells Hyun not to do that, and the protagonist asks her to calm down because he rejected the suggestion. Thinking for a moment, the boy asks where the slaves who didn't pay the taxes ended up. Linda replies that they work in the mines, but due to the harsh labor, some die from lack of food. With so much bad news, the protagonist says that the debt is just a small detail. Hyun thanks her for being honest, but he still has a few more questions and then asks what kind of person the security captain is. With a sad face, the girl responds with something basic, like his duties and always being loyal to his work. This confuses Hyun, and he quickly asks why the sad expression. She replies that it's out of pity, since the security captain doesn't get involved in politics, and couldn't protect him from Tommen, and knows agreed. Once again, the protagonist thanks her, saying that thanks to her, he was able to understand the situation. Just like in the dream, the girl excuses herself, saying she has a patient to attend to. After she leaves, Hyun talks to the ghost about why the security captain killed the former lord. Dronzer says he doesn't know, and all he knows is because he witnessed the scene. The boy questions his usefulness, and the ghost replies that he'll teach him the emperor's swordsmanship. Raising his hand, the ghost tells him to forget about this territory and go to the mountains to train for 30 years. That way he'll have the power to even become emperor, and many strong subordinates will serve him. Hyun says that living as a lord is difficult. Dronzer says that some insurgencies may appear in the future, and without power, the protagonist will end up dead because he won't be able to defend himself. In the end, he'll regret not having trained in the mountains for 30 years. Laughing, the boy says that's useless because he knows Dronzer is afraid he won't be able to destroy the dragon's eye. Angrily, the ghost shouts, saying that it's for his own good, and asks Hyun not to misunderstand. Jokingly, he asks if the ghost is at Sunbeer or something, but Dronzer tells him to stop with the jokes. Hyun says that even if he wanted to learn, he doesn't know how strong the emperor's swordsmanship is. And then he shares that in his past life, he spent 10 years fighting for his survival, so he should at least be able to protect himself. Emerging from the dagger, the ghost asks to see his skills. Observing Dronzer's incredible appearance, Hyun is surprised to discover that the man is actually a woman. Dronzer remarks that no matter how many centuries pass, people's reactions remain the same. Returning to the matter at hand, Dronzer asks again to see the protagonist's abilities. She quickly recalls that he was able to teleport before and asks if he can do it again. Hyun thinks about how he managed to do that, realizing that one moment he was looking at the soldiers and the next, he was in a different place. The same thing happened when he saw Rondo and quickly ended up behind him. Maybe this happened by focusing his vision on a distant target. Dronzer suggests they test this theory. She then heads to the window and passes through it. The protagonist runs and opens it, and quickly sees that she's down below, asking him to focus his vision. Our boy concentrates hard to teleport. A green aura similar to before envelops him, and in a flash, he's down there. Dronzer comments that the way this works is fascinating. In the past, there were mages who could do the same, but not instantaneously. The woman stretches out her hand, saying that now she will show him her swordsmanship. A black sword materializes in her hands. With a terrifying expression, she asks the boy to try to defend himself. In a fraction of a second, she makes several continuous movements. Soon after, her sword multiplies. Ken becomes alert, trying at least to dodge since defending would be impossible. After all, the pressure she exudes is terrifying. Like a wolf hunting its prey, a fierce attack rushes toward him. The speed is such that the protagonist can't even move. Fortunately, nothing happens to him. Dronzer explains that it was just an illusion of the sword. Standing up, the boy asks if this is the emperor's swordsmanship. After hearing this, the woman starts laughing, because that's just a basic technique that everyone learns to become the emperor's bodyguard. Positioning her sword, she says the true swordsmanship is much more terrifying than this little wolf. Besides, it wasn't even designed to be used by humans. This piques the boy's curiosity. Excited, Dronzer asks if he wants to know why, but to have that knowledge, he needs to learn the Empire's history. The protagonist responds that he's not curious enough to want to know everything. To escape the history lesson, the boy runs and she chases after him, telling him to come back. Sometime later, we see the kingdom from above. Children play and adults converse. Meanwhile, two malicious individuals discuss the night and summon Tommen. Nose says it's normal for a lord to ask about the financial situation of his land. Annoyed, the fat man responds that this was the first time it happened, so now it's better to use a punishment and reward approach. Nose asks what that would be. Tommen replies that the lord is currently 15 years old and hasn't yet sought a bride, so he plans to send many beautiful women to distract him too much to care about the empire. Nose asks what the punishment would be. With a malicious smile, Tommen says it's to make Hyun sick again, so it'll be easier to control him. A bit upset, Nose says that the punishment is too harsh, and that they'll lose a lot if the lord dies. Relax, the fat man says they can discuss it another day, because now he's going to prepare the rewards. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes throughout the area. Tommen runs to see what it is. There we see the protagonist shouting that he is the Lord of Alberon, and declaring that he will cut all taxes in half. The man says he's crazy. The people rejoice at the news. Everyone jumps for joy, and even the children smile brightly. Rondo says that this is dangerous. Looking down, Hyun says he likes their energy. Right behind him, Lanzer warns the boy not to be blinded by power. Hyun replies that with great power comes great responsibility. Another commotion starts next to him. It's the nobles leaving their comfort zones. Tommen looks visibly furious. In his subconscious, the protagonist thinks it wouldn't be a problem to indulge just a little more. Then the boy gets down from the carriage. Tommen welcomes him and says he didn't expect his lord to appear there, to which Hyun responds that Tommen always comes to the castle, and today he just came to return the countless visits. Afterward, the boy takes a look around the government property. Inside, there's not much that's different. Seeing a door, he decides to open it. The place is a garden with a pleasant aroma and beautiful flowers. This leaves Hyun impressed. Hyun comments that this garden is more beautiful than the one at the castle, and they must have put in a lot of effort. Tommen informs him that this garden has existed for a long time and adds that the nobles haven't touched anything. The boy starts laughing, saying he made a mistake, but then he pauses to think. And then he says he heard that both of them swore loyalty before this ring. The two confirm that this is indeed true. Getting straight to the point, the protagonist orders them to revert the taxes to what they were before in all the cities. Hearing this, they are confused. Tommen asks how the Lord can make such a critical decision without consulting them. Without wasting time, Hyun explains that the reason is the people who work to death in the mines because of the high tax rate. Tommen tries to remind him about the debt that needs to be paid off quickly. The protagonist says that nothing changed. Even when the taxes were raised, the debt remained high. Hyun asserts that he suspects the collections are being tampered with. Tommen questions if his lord is suspecting him. The boy says no, but that the best thing to do is to eliminate the complaints of the inhabitants. Nevertheless, Tommen tries to maintain the taxes as they are. But the protagonist notices this and quickly asks if the man is disregarding his command. Tommen argues that the high tax rate currently in place was approved by the Lord himself, and because of his memory loss, he may be having difficulty making decisions. Hyun asks if that's what he thinks, and then he asks Nose if he agrees with Tommen. Nose simply says he will follow the orders of his lord. Smiling, Hyun says that Nose certainly understands him. Tommen shouts that he's the one who manages the finances. The protagonist ignores the complaints and says he's heading back to the castle because he's tired. Then he heads for the carriage. But before going to the castle, Hyun calls the old man's attention and orders Nose to convince Tommen at all costs. Entering the carriage, the boy also calls out to the fat man, saying that perhaps he'll see him today, and Tommen responds that his lord can summon him at any time. The protagonist leaves, leaving the two behind. Tommen trembles with rage, calling Hyun a bastard. After all this conversation, the boy takes a deep breath. Lanzer asks what he's going to do with Tommen. Our boy responds that he's going to teach him a lesson, because the scoundrel pretended to be a fool and was even bold enough to rob him. She teases the protagonist a bit, noting that it was Hyun who allowed all this to happen. Angry, the boy says he didn't cause these problems on purpose, but now he's going to sleep because he has matters to attend to tonight. Sometime later, we witness chaos. The garden's plants are all destroyed. Meanwhile, Tommen swings a sword, cursing Hyun to die. The man takes out his anger on the plants. After he's vented, he sees what he's done. Nose remarks that more than 100 years of care were destroyed in a single moment. Tommen asks why Nose seems to be siding with the Lord. He says that's not entirely true, but the village chiefs have been complaining a lot about the oppressive taxes, so they should be relieved at least a little. Tommen says he doesn't care about those wretches, and if a rebellion happens, they should just kill everyone. Nose advises doing everything in moderation. Even after hearing all this, Tommen yells that he doesn't care. Nose says that the Lord came there to reach an agreement, and a good subordinate wouldn't reject his orders. Tommen declares that he's not anyone's subordinate, so he'll never submit to lowering the tax rate. Nose doesn't care about his opinion, but says something that frightens him. If the protagonist decides to use the captain of the guard, Tommen won't be able to handle it. Sweating profusely, he says that's impossible. Leaving, Nose asserts that anything is possible. Tommen says that when he gets the chance, he'll whip him to death. Night falls in the territory of Alberon. An old man walks along the roads, and then notices something strange. A figure that appears to be human disappears as if it never existed, but then it reappears behind him. The person in question is the protagonist, who is now helping the drunk old man. The boy is training his teleportation, going from one side to the other through the village. The elderly man doesn't understand anything, but then Hyun vanishes and appears on top of a house. Smiling, he says this is incredible, and Lanzer comments that the boy is very childish for playing around. The protagonist ignores her and heads to Tommen's house. In the blink of an eye, he appears on the roof. Hyun comments that the place is somewhat deserted, and the guard's armor is different. Lanzer says they must be mercenaries. To do all this, the boy questions if the fat man thinks he's the Lord. Since Blanzer is his spirit, the protagonist asks her to investigate and she grumbles. Hyun says it wouldn't be beneficial if he died, especially since the ghost needs him. Still annoyed, Blanzer says it's not possible because she can't stray far from the dagger, but suggests that the boys stay nearby. Inside the mansion, Tommen is eating. His butler informs him that the maid from the castle has arrived, and he tells him to bring her in. A bit uncomfortable, the girl approaches. Tommen wastes no time and orders her to spread the contents of this vial on the Lord's bed. Confused, she asks what it is. Tommen replies that they are fleas contaminated with a plague. The maid is terrified because if anything happens to the boy, she'll be the first to be blamed. Tommen doesn't care and just orders her to obey, reminding her that he was the one who helped her when she was a street thief. With no other choice, the girl trembles. The fat man says that if she does the job well, he'll get her out of the castle and ensure her freedom. The maid then leaves. Blanzer witnessed the entire conversation. She then returns to where the protagonist is to report what happened. Hyun asks how the trip was, and the woman says the boy is far too relaxed. But then she tells him what Tommen is plotting. Knowing this, Hyun realizes he needs to do something. He then asks how many guards there are, and Blanzer responds that there are 9 in total, and that there are no windows in the fat man's room. This makes the mission a bit tricky, but in any case, Hyun says he'll enter through the corridor. He quickly descends from the roof and lands in front of the window. There are 3 guards there, but the protagonist ignores them and teleports. The one with pink hair becomes alert and asks who he is. Our boy remains silent. He quickly appears in front of the 2 guards and easily immobilizes them. The last guard draws his sword, saying that the protagonist will not get past him. Hyun doesn't care about such words and momentarily uses his ability to appear behind him. Still, the guard leaves no openings and counterattacks. Hyun dodges his sword. He says he won't be defeated by mere tricks. Beside him, Blanzer laughs, saying that now Hyun doesn't seem so confident. Emitting a terrifying aura, the guard gets into an attack position. He shouts that none of Hyun's tricks will work anymore. But as he goes for the final blow, the boy disappears, and then appears above him, preparing an attack. Moving quickly, he applies a leg chokehold. The guard begins to choke, and Hyun delivers a slap to his head. The force of the blow causes him to fall to the ground, unconscious. Blanzer warns that more people are coming up the stairs. The protagonist approaches the door and looks through the peephole. Tommen is already prepared with a sword. Hyun then teleports to his room. With just one blow from the boy, Tommen falls unconscious, and the protagonist remarks that the fat bastard is way too heavy. The guards arrive, but it's already too late. Our boy has already appeared behind them. The guard is confused, especially since he heard a noise earlier. Hyun smirks, and then disappears like a shadow. He quickly reappears outside the mansion, near a lake, dragging Tommen. Hyun shouts, questioning what this man eats every day to be so heavy. Angry, the protagonist says he's lucky he won't kill him and then dunks him in the water. The fat man wakes up in a panic, saying it's impossible. Hyun tells him he ordered several times to lower the taxes. Tommen asks what's going on, and the boy just approaches, telling him to clench his teeth. The fat man takes a red cross to the face, and then falls sprawling on the ground. Not giving up, the wretch grabs a stone and quickly leaps, saying he's going to kill Hyun. Easily, Hyun immobilizes him. At that moment, Tommen feels his dinner coming back up. Then he starts vomiting while the boy says he won't be defeated by a mere stone. The protagonist states that he's already uncovered all of Tommen's plans. Of course, the fat man is surprised and then tries to explain. But Hyun isn't in the mood for talk and prepares another punch, which lands squarely in his belly. The protagonist places his foot on his head to drown him. Our boy asks why he did all this and if his life was so boring that he wanted some excitement, especially since all he asked was to lower the taxes. Then Hyun removes his foot from the fat man. In utter desperation, Tommen begs for mercy, and the boy says it's better to find someone else to manage the economy. Bowing, Tommen says he'll be his dog forever. Ignoring him, our boy aims at his throat and says that if he misses, it will hurt more, and of course, Tommen becomes frantic. Tommen pleads for one more chance, promising that he will return everything. Hyun questions how he dares to bargain with money that's not his. The fat man insists that's not the case and just asks for another chance. Our boy pauses to think for a moment, then calls Tommen's attention, saying he'll give him another chance because he's a merciful lord. Tommen shouts that he'll lower the taxes immediately. Hyun tells him not to forget to inform everyone that the taxes will be reduced thanks to him, and he adds that Tommen should remove the people from the mines. Moreover, the protagonist mentions that Tommen has a nice house, which was built with stolen money. Not being an idiot, Hyun orders him to move out, because from now on, the house is his. Looking at his face, the boy asks if he thinks that's unfair, and Tommen quickly replies that he doesn't. Then Hyun tells him to disappear immediately from his sight. Before leaving for the mansion, Tommen says he doesn't know how to get back since he was brought there by force. But Hyun doesn't care and just orders him to vanish. The fat man sets off, probably losing a few pounds along the way. Blanzer asks if the boy trusts his word, and Hyun's response is no. But since he scared him, Tommen should stay loyal for a while. Standing up, the protagonist says he's very tired, and then teleports back to the castle. The morning arrives with a beautiful sun, and in the meantime, rats appear to trouble the Lord. The maid approaches the boy's bed, her face showing that she still doesn't think it's a good idea. Even so, she doesn't give up and opens the jar. A hand calmly rests on her shoulder. The girl is startled to see that it's her lord. Trying to deceive him, she says it's nothing, that she was just tidying things up. Quickly, she tries to leave so as not to be discovered, but the protagonist stops her, saying that if Tommen orders her to do anything, she should talk to him. Then he orders her to throw the jar into the fire. As she leaves, she says she understands. The maid rushes past Linda, who wonders if something happened. Forgetting about it, she enters Hyun's room with the books for him to study. Linda mentions that she heard her lord is going to reduce the taxes by half in Karmu. Our boy says it won't just be there, but in all the other places as well. The girl asks if that's allowed. Hyun says that as the lord, the authority is his. That night, somewhere in the village of Andera, Linda is talking with two people about a man who is sick and needs his leg amputated to survive. One of them asks how the man will continue living without one of his feet. Hearing this, she becomes angry and says they just have to try. She then lights a match and ignites the medicine, telling the wounded man to inhale slowly. Afterward, she says they need to decide whether to amputate the leg or not. The woman says she called Linda because she thought she would cure him for free, not bring more pests into the house. Without hesitation, the man says it's better to die than to become a burden to the family. They tell Linda to leave. The girl asks them to wait, but the door is slammed in her face. Sad, she knows the patient won't survive until tomorrow. Almost crying, she blames herself for not being able to save him. With nothing else to do, she leaves. The next day, Nose and Tommen have a conversation about how the fat man was beaten up by the Lord for trying to put fleas in his bed. The old man can't believe it happened. Tommen insists it's true and says he still remembers those terrifying eyes. Even so, Nose says it doesn't make sense since the boy was sick until recently. The fat man goes into a frenzy, claiming that all this time Hyun was lying. Confused, Nose says it can't be that, as the Lord's body has always been fragile. After hearing this, Tommen gets angry because he almost died. The old man reminds him that he had warned him. Tommen hands him a piece of paper. It states that all the stolen money must be returned. Reading it, Nose becomes irritated, immediately asking what kind of joke this is, and Tommen says he didn't want this either, but he promised to return the money he had stolen over the years. Since the old man is an accomplice, he must also return what he took. Nose says he would love to kill him, but he understands the position he's in, so he says he'll comply. Tommen informs him that he's going to lower the taxes. Crying, he asks not to be blamed since he's been kicked out of his own house. Nose ignores him and leaves, saying he'll get the money. Sometime later, we see the castle. Inside the castle, our boy is training his swordsmanship. Compared to before, his attacks are faster, stronger, and more precise. Each strike slices through the air as if it were cutting a leaf. Lanzer watches Hyun's training. Tired, he asks if he can learn something else. But Woman responds that the boy has to strike 1,000 more times. She adds that when she was a child, at just 6 years old, she would strike the air 5,000 times a day. Hyun lies down saying he can't do that, while Blanzer continues to complain. After hearing so much, the protagonist gets up, saying he'll do it. She says there are 700 strikes left to finish. In his thoughts, the boy mentions that he wants to see Linda. The scene shifts to Linda walking through the village. The girl wonders if the patient from yesterday is still alive. Up ahead, a fight breaks out. People shout and place bets on who will win. A white-haired man takes a kick to the face, ends up knocked out, and falls to the ground. We see that it's the same person who was sick yesterday. Linda notices this immediately. Everyone cheers for the man who won. After everything is over, the girl approaches him and asks if he's okay. Looking back, the man recognizes her. He asks if Linda is there to convince him to cut off his leg, lifting his pant leg slightly to show that he's fine. The girl asks how this happened overnight. The ungrateful man says that if he had listened to her, he would have lived the rest of his life as a cripple. Ignoring that, Linda steps closer to tend to his face. After treating him, the girl stands up and asks if he can explain what happened, because such a severe wound healed too quickly. Elsewhere, at Nakarmo's house, we see Linda looking through some things. The girl seems indecisive about something. Her father arrives and asks what she's looking for. Linda responds that she's searching for a silver knife. He asks what she needs it for, and the girl says it's for surgery. The doctor asks what kind of surgery it is, and Linda doesn't know how to answer. Her father starts to have various suspicions. The girl explains what happened, that the man Josh discovered a hermit's inheritance in a dungeon and found a bottle of medicine. But when he was returning, he was attacked by an undead creature and injured his foot. Without a doubt, if it had continued like that, he would have become one too. We see that Josh accidentally dropped the medicine bottle. It fell to the ground and shattered. When he woke up, he was already completely fine. Under his bed was the bottle. Linda explains that the spot where the bottle broke wasn't wet. Nakarmo says it's likely that the medicine evaporated, yet it's still hard to believe. She says she saw it with her own eyes. The doctor says that if it's true, then it's definitely a hermit's inheritance, but he asks what this dungeon is. Josh appears behind him, saying that the place is in the Hirsch Mountains. He claims that anything that comes out of there, half of it is his. At night, we see a campsite. There, Charlin is taking a bath, washing off the blood from the long battles. Someone asks if he's going back to Albaran. The captain looks back and sees a man sitting on a rock. His name is Sharel, an old acquaintance of his. Charlin asks if it's a coincidence or if he came looking for him. The man asks how much the captain believes in coincidences. Ignoring this, Charlin says that Sharel seems to be doing better. Working for the Great Lord must have done him well, but he says he was more comfortable in Albaran. Getting a bit more serious, he asks if the captain has heard the news that King Arthur isn't recovering from his illness. They say he's in the final stages of life, and then he asks if Charling isn't upset since he was quite close to the king. The captain responds that this is the natural cycle of life. Charles says that a state funeral might be held within a month. Charlin asks if he came all the way there just to extend this invitation. Sharel says that once the king dies, the country will start fighting for succession, and the great lords will begin to show their power. He then asks if Charlene will support Lord Bonin. Charlin responds that he has become a vassal of the Albaran family. Sharel says that's a waste and that he should seek someone better. The captain asks if he should look for someone like him. After hearing this, Sharel lets out a small smile and then says that the rumors are that the one who will succeed the crown is Prince Tywell. But he claims that this isn't a good choice because Tywell has thrown people to wild beasts just for fun, has never received a proper education, and leads a debauched life. Then he states that if a man like that becomes king, the country will fall into ruin. He then adds that it was Tywell who made that scar on Charlin's face. If things continue as they are, the territory of Albaran will be drawn into a war for the crown. The captain says that if that happens, he will enter the battlefield as his lord orders. Back at the protagonist's castle, our boy writes something on a piece of paper but then complains because his hands hurt from the intense training. Lanzer appears and tells Hyun to stop being a crybaby. The protagonist ignores her words and says he hopes Linda arrives soon to soothe them. His soldier arrives and asks for permission to enter. He then informs that a young man has arrived at the castle gates asking to see him. The man said he came on behalf of Linda. This surprises the boy, and he immediately orders him to be brought in. Rondo brings Josh along with him. They both go to Hyun's office. After entering, our boy asks what this has to do with Linda. The man appears very frightened, and then asks for help to save the healer who is trapped in the dungeon. Astonished, the protagonist asks him to explain everything. After the explanation, the Lord recaps, asking if he, Linda, and Dr. Nakarmo went into a dungeon and only he managed to escape. Trembling, the man says it wasn't quite like that because they were being chased. Crying, he says his group didn't know that this dungeon was so big and full of undead monsters. Responding, Lan says that he already suspected something since monsters and dragons were mentioned in dungeons, but questions how it's possible that dungeons truly exist. Rondo adds that if what the man said is really true, it would be very unlikely that both Linda and her father are still alive. Realizing what is happening, the Lord tells Rondo to gather his soldiers immediately. Quickly, all the kingdom's soldiers are gathered in front of the palace. Shouting, the commander orders that all the soldiers be equipped with silver swords. The soldiers begin to grab the swords one by one. Lan is also wearing the soldier's armor and holding a sword, wondering if it is made of pure silver. Surprised, Rondo asks the Lord if he really intends to go. Training with the sword, he responds that this is an important matter. But his soldier explains that no matter how important Linda and Nakarmo are, the Lord is even more important, which leaves the protagonist very confused. Stopping the training, the Lord says that he must be mistaken about one thing. Arguing, he says that lives are important, but they could discover great treasures inside the dungeon. Holding the silver sword, Park says he likes treasures, and that he will get many treasures in this dungeon to pay off his debts, in addition to trying to save Linda and Nakarmo, so they shouldn't worry. Sometime later, after all the soldiers are organized for battle, the Lord begins to give a speech, saying that you will lead everyone in the vanguard. Shouting, he claims they will unite all their forces to conquer this dungeon. But this doesn't excite the soldiers at all, who remain silent after hearing the Lord's entire speech. Nervous, he thinks that he doesn't seem like someone trustworthy, and that if he were a soldier, he would find him ridiculous at this moment too. However, the protagonist thinks of a way to turn things around. Yelling, he says that if none of the soldiers scream until their throats explode, they will die by the hands of their lord. Nervously, they begin to shout, but in a very low volume. The Lord then tells them to shout louder. Irritated, he says they are going to conquer the dungeon, and the soldiers begin to raise their voices. He concludes by saying that they will wipe out the undead, and the soldiers repeat the phrase. Excited, he says that when they finish with the entire dungeon, they will have a good drink as a reward. In response, all the soldiers start to shout very excitedly because of that promise. Rondo is both surprised and nervous, saying that he can't believe this is really the Lord they know, and the commander says he feels the same. Then the commander asks if they shouldn't stop the Lord from going into this dungeon, but Rondo responds that it will be hard for the Lord to get out of this atmosphere, and that their only choice is to keep watching over him. After the speech, the protagonist announces that they are leaving now. The Lord is riding alongside the commander. In his mind, he hopes Linda is alive and well. Sometime later on Hirsute Mountain, The entire group of soldiers is passing through an extremely narrow rocky path. It is so narrow that they are pressed against the rocks. The Lord is following right behind the commander in front of Rondo and the rest of the soldiers. Tyre, the man who asked for help earlier, thinks that the Lord doesn't really seem either weak or cowardly, as the rumors say. The commander asks if they are far, and the man says they are almost there, that they will arrive after crossing the ravine. Annoyed, the commander says he should have reported the discovery of this dungeon to the Lord and claimed the rewards when they found it, but they were too irresponsible for that. Exhausted, the man comments that it will only be worth a few gold coins at best. Then the commander says that since they were so confident, they should have gone all the way without relying on their Lord for this. In response, the man just stays silent, listening to the scolding. But someone says it's alright, leaving him surprised. It was the Lord who said it, adding that it takes a lot of courage to ask for help and that they should only focus on saving Linda and Nakarmo at this moment. Looking back, the man seems regretful for everything he did and remains silent again. After walking for a while, he says they have arrived at the place. It's a very isolated cave with a small entrance. Heading to the entrance, he says that if they go this way, they will find a small cave with a stone chamber. He explains that at first they thought that was the entire dungeon, but after entering they realized that beyond the walls of the stone chamber, there was an entire underground village. Surprised, the Lord asks if he really said underground village. The man confirms again what he said and adds that the most curious thing is that inside this village, there is a sky. As they walk, the Lord asks if it makes sense for there to be a moon and a sky inside this underground village. At that moment, the female spirit comments that dungeons that appear in the crack of a broken world have incomprehensible things, and it's no surprise to have a sun or moon inside an underground area in these cases. Walking further inside, the Lord asks the man if he got separated from Linda and Nakarmo in that underground village. Looking back, he says yes, and that they are probably alive, hiding somewhere in that village. After so much walking, they arrive at a place with what appears to be human-made constructions. Descending the stairs, they notice a monster with a malicious aura near them. It's an undead creature dressed in a soldier's uniform. Quickly, the commander throws his sword at the skeleton, which defends itself using a shield. The Lord, surprised, says that this skeleton is quite fast for a being made only of bones. The spirit reappears, saying that this agility is natural for them as they possess much better fighting power than regular soldiers. After defending itself, the skeleton glares with a murderous aura. Scared, the protagonist wonders if the skeleton looked at him. In an instant, the skeleton jumps, and the commander yells for them to protect the Lord. The skeleton is charging toward the Lord, but someone steps in front to protect him from the undead. Two soldiers defend him. One holds a shield to block the skeleton's attack, while the other prepares to strike with a silver sword. Quickly, three soldiers draw their swords. They attack the skeleton all at once, and something blue comes out of it. After being struck by the silver swords, the undead begins to burn completely. Blue flames consume it down to the bones, literally. The protagonist watches all this, saying that it's a pretty flashy way to die. He asks Rondo if this place was actually some kind of experimental laboratory. Suddenly, the spirit explains that some experimental alchemists were dangerous and unethical, and many of them used unknown dungeons to set up their own bases. Sweating, the protagonist asks if they coexist with all the monsters in the dungeon. Meanwhile, the man finds a secret passage on a bookshelf in a style similar to Harry Potter. Upon finding this passage, the blonde man tells them to take a look at what's inside. Going through the passage, they end up seeing several undead creatures filled with malicious aura staring at them. Afraid, the protagonist says that they are well prepared for this. He orders the soldiers to advance against the undead. Standing behind everyone, he only watches the fight without saying anything. Rondo easily takes down one of the skeletons. The same happens with the commander, who doesn't even break a sweat as he defeats them. Seeing all this, the protagonist gets excited about his squad. He says that the work they did is incredible and congratulates them on the fight. Then the search continues with everyone walking through the passage. However, something catches Lan's attention, leaving him speechless. Seeing a giant village with a red moon in the sky, he says he can't believe there really is an underground moon, feeling as though he's in a different world. Next to him, the man from earlier tells the Lord that this is the place he mentioned before. A complete village with several houses, a river, and some technological advancement, judging by the architecture of the place. One of the undead creatures is walking through the street looking for something. It's walking normally while someone watches it from a window. It's Nakarmo, hiding behind a wall, saying he doesn't know why the monsters follow them to this place. His daughter, Linda, holding a dagger, responds that the reason is that her father smashed the monster's knees with a rock. The skeleton then notices something. Holding a shield, the doctor says they've been spotted. He says he will go down to distract the monsters, and that his daughter should take the opportunity to escape. But the girl says she was the one who brought him to this dungeon, taking responsibility. She adds that if they combine their forces, they can handle the monsters, and that her father shouldn't be weak. Agreeing with her, her father says they must fight together to get out of this place. He adds that while he blocks, she should finish the monster with her silver dagger. They leave their hiding spot with great caution. Then the man spots the monster as both of them are surrounded by several skeletons. Frightened, the girl says the undead are right above them. Meanwhile, in another part of the underground village, Lan asks Rondo if he shot an arrow into the sky like a flare, who would reach it first, and Rondo says probably whoever is closest. Pondering, the protagonist agrees that whoever is nearest will arrive first. He then tells Rondo to proceed. He obeys while the soldiers in the background prepare. Back to the father and daughter, one of the skeletons tries to hit the man. He defends himself with his shield, sweating from the tense situation. In the background, the girl arrives, yelling for the skeleton to leave her father alone. She strikes the undead with her silver dagger. However, there are still many of them around. Irritated, the man says these monsters never end. Meanwhile, Linda thinks about the Lord, wondering if he will probably learn to read and write well, even if she isn't there with him. Suddenly, several flaming arrows appear in the sky. Both of them look back, surprised. The skeletons also observe the sky. Father and daughter just watch as the skeletons head toward the light. Waiting for them are the soldiers. Relieved, Park says the bony ones arrive first as expected. He orders his knights to take care of the undead. As the battle rages, Linda and her father just observe. They realize that the Lord is with his knights. Crying with emotion, she says the Lord came to save them. The battle is intense between the soldiers and the skeletons. One of the undead hits a soldier directly. Holding the sword hilt, the Lord says there are many of them in this area. He tells Rondo to follow him as they are going into the fight. Rondo tells his Lord not to join the battle, which annoys Park. The Lord is emanating a green aura. Suddenly, he disappears, which shocks Rondo. Looking back, he sees that the Lord is teleported and wonders how he got there. In the background, he yells at him to stop. But Lan looks at his knight and says that if he wants to survive this, he orders him to fight as well. He easily defeats all the skeletons in his path. However, one of the skeletons suddenly appears out of nowhere. Focusing, Park charges at the monster, striking it directly with his silver sword. Then the spirit appears next to the boy, saying that he's using the abilities he was trying to hide, which makes him seem desperate. Annoyed, the boy wonders what the point is of worrying about that when everyone's life is at risk, and it's not easy to train new elite soldiers. As they argue, the skeleton appears ready to take revenge. It lands a strong hit on the protagonist's back. He immediately teleports behind the monster, delivering a fatal blow to the undead who didn't expect the hero's ability. After finishing the monster, Lan says he got hurt because of the spirit and tells it not to call him during a fight. Irritated, he strikes another monster and asks what it thinks about being the Emperor's bodyguard. Striking another, he says it's completely useless in battles. Watching all this, the commander wonders if that is truly his lord. He questions when he became so strong. Then he asks Rondo if the person fighting is really the Lord, and the man replies that it is. After hearing the response, the commander just smiles. Raising his sword, he announces for everyone to hold on because the Lord is fighting alongside them. At that moment, all the soldiers shout, responding to the Lord's bravery. They charge at the monsters, defeating them one by one in the battle. Very tired, Lan says it seems like they are nearing the end of this conflict. Worried, Rondo approaches and asks his lord if he is alright, and he responds that he is. But the man notices the wound on his side. He says it's all his fault, but Park tries to ease the situation by telling him not to worry and that it's normal to get hurt in battle. Appearing in human form, the spirit says it never thought it would show up in a place like this. Surprised, the protagonist just watches in silence. Then they notice something in the sky. The woman says they must leave this place immediately because they don't have the strength to fight this creature, leaving the blonde man confused about what she's talking about. She then explains that it's an undead knight, a subordinate of the ancient dragons who turned into evil spirits wandering in the dungeon, and she yells at the protagonist to dodge. Something hits the ground with great power. A black aura fills the air as Rondo screams for his lord. From a distance, Lan also shouts, asking if Rondo can hear him. Whispering in his ear, the woman tells him to stop shouting and look carefully, warning that the undead knight has already begun to reign over the area and that he needs to flee, even if alone. Terrified, he thinks about his comrades dying one by one. He then questions if she's asking him to abandon his subordinates, saying that he will not make that decision. Irritated, the woman asks if he wants to throw everything away by dying in this place and tells him to think about his future. Without reaction, he merely asks if she's really talking about his future. Ripping his sword, he declares that his future is right here now. In response, the spirit remains silent. In his thoughts, the protagonist knows he cannot use his distortion ability because he can't see anything, and it will be the end of him if he gets attacked at this moment. Suddenly, the woman screams that something is above him. Lan reflexively swings his sword, managing to defend against the strike of this dark, malevolent being. A bit farther away, his soldier watches everything unfold. Despite being able to defend against the attack, the monster is so strong that it ends up breaking Park's sword. Frustrated, Park finds himself in a difficult situation. This is the undead knight the spirit had warned him about. Frightened, the woman tells the protagonist that he was very lucky, but it won't happen again, and he must flee immediately. The monster, with a terrifying and powerful aura, wields a heavy lance along with his shield. His presence is so intimidating that Lan stands there silent and scared. Suddenly, the monster appears behind the hero, preparing to finish him with a single blow. Sensing the movement, the spirit yells at Lan. Focused, he begins to activate his special ability, teleporting to another place, preventing the undead knight from completing its attack, leaving it very confused. Looking at the ground, the monster realizes the boy has simply vanished. Quickly, the hero appears above the monster, yelling it was looking for him. The monster turns around, pulling its horse, which responds to it. Instantly, it charges toward the protagonist. The monster tries to strike the hero again, but Lan teleports, appearing behind the undead knight. With something in his hand, he prepares his attack, throwing a rock directly at the monster's head. Irritated, the woman asks why he is provoking it, and nervously, Lan just says he was scared the monster might go after one of his soldiers. In response, the knight begins to turn around as the hero activates his power. As the monster moves in another direction, the hero shouts, challenging it to fight seriously, calling the creature to come at him. Realizing the direction the monster is moving, the protagonist quickly teleports in front of it. His soldiers then notice something. Rondo warns of a battle taking place, calling for his lord. Linda and her father also stand still, just watching the whole confrontation. With its lance, the monster tries to hit its target, but Lan barely dodges in time. Nikarma watches, wondering if he's starting to see things, while Linda is also confused, questioning if this is truly the lord she knows. Meanwhile, the monster tries to land a fatal blow, but the blonde man manages to dodge again. Already exhausted, Lan wonders if he's teleported too much and says he's starting to feel dizzy. Seeing his seemingly unbeatable opponent, he thinks he should hide first. Teleporting behind some rubble, he wonders if the monster never gets tired. The spirit replies that this happens because it's already dead, and that one cannot defeat an undead knight by just hiding. Lan responds that he already knows that. Showing his broken sword, he argues that the knight shattered it with just one hit, and the woman says he should have fled if he wasn't confident about winning. Reflective, he says he can only use teleportation 3 more times. Looking out from behind his hiding spot, he wonders what the noise is. Then he realizes that his soldiers are heading toward the undead knight. Rondo shouts that they've come to help their lord, striking the monster with a sword, which it quickly defends against. With a murderous look, the knight becomes very angry. Counterattacking, it throws Rondo far away, making him smash into the ground. The strike is so powerful that it causes the soldier to spit blood upon impact. Seeing this, the commander prepares for his charge, rushing in with full force as he strikes the monster's lance, delivering multiple blows with incredible speed. But apparently none of them have a significant effect on its lance. After this, the monster lands a single blow on the commander. The injured soldiers in the background shout for everyone to follow the lord, while Lan tells them not to come to him. At the same time, the monster is wiping out all the soldiers at once. The woman remarks that he has truly loyal soldiers and suggests he flee while they buy him time, which irritates the boy, prompting him to ask if she is really telling him to do that. At that moment, he notices something happening. He sees something in front of him. It's Linda and her father together. The girl begins to look at him. Irritated, the woman asks if he is still hesitating about what to do and states she can't believe she made a contract with someone so pathetic just to rid herself of dragon eyes. In response, he tells her not to be so harsh. Laughing, he says he's also nervous about the whole situation. Gripping his sword firmly, he says he's thought about the position he's in right now, thinking hard about what he should really protect and what he must repay. Smiling, he says he now understands because he has overcome extremely difficult situations in his past. With a confident look, he asserts that he also knows he will win today's battle. In shock, the woman realizes the boy has learned to use his strength. That Lan stands face to face with the dungeon's boss. Holding his sword tightly, he no longer feels the same fear as before. Wounded, Rondo watches his lord, unable to believe what he's seeing. Meanwhile, the woman thinks that although the concentration of power is weak, he managed to use it. She then asks what is going on because she's never seen him practice this, and he says it's his first time doing it, which leaves the woman completely confused and irritated as Park says he's coming. The monster is heading toward the protagonist on his horse, attempting to strike directly at his head, but the boy manages to dodge. The monster tries another attack with its lance, which is dodged again. The woman then says she doesn't know what the boy's plan is, but his strength won't last long, and he says he's aware of that. Thinking that a direct confrontation would be too much for him to handle, he looks at the boss and tells him to come at him. In response, the undead soldier charges toward the protagonist on his horse. Curious, the woman asks the blonde boy what he's planning to do. A bit farther away, Rondo watches the fight, calling for his lord, worried. Quickly, the monster approaches the hero. Park just absorbs the impact of the blow with his sword, soaring into the sky from the force of the strike. In the air, he begins to use his ability, emitting a greenish aura. The monster, noticing this, realizes he's going to appear behind it, so it rushes toward the protagonist before taking any damage. But the boy remains steady in his position, preparing for something. Analyzing the fight, the woman comments that it's surprising because the boy wasn't trying to teleport, but rather to lure the undead's attack. In the sky, Lan asks Rondo to throw him his sword right now. Following his lord's command, Rondo immediately throws his sword toward him. With quick reflexes, the boy catches the soldier's sword. He then prepares for his final blow. From above, he descends with the sword, striking a frontal blow with all his strength on the monster. Sometime later, still in the underground village, the protagonist is lying on the ground fully bandaged. He then wakes up and opens his eyes, seeing Linda, that man, and Rondo, who greets him with a smile. As he stands, he leans on Linda, who tells him to be careful. Smiling, the boy says he's happy that she is safe. Crying, she thanks him for saving her. Then she cries even more, thanking him for being alive, and Park tells her there's no need to cry. Changing the subject, he asks if she was the one who treated his wound, and the girl responds that it wasn't her, but her father. Nervously, he asks where her father is. Linda replies that he's treating the soldiers right now, and Lan comments that he must be very busy. Happy, the Lord asks Rondo for a report on the damage suffered by his soldiers. With a serious look, Rondo says there are 15 soldiers with serious injuries and 37 with minor wounds. Lan asks if there are any fatalities. Rondo replies that there are none, and even the serious injuries are not fatal, which relieves the blonde boy, who says that's great news. The girl says all of this is her fault and that she'll accept any punishment her lord has for her. Placing his hand on his chest, the boy says it's his fault for returning without fully understanding the situation. The protagonist, as he heard from Josh, that she entered the dungeon to search for evidence of incredible remedy. He asks if she managed to find it. Nervously, the man says that they did find something, and Linda mentions they discovered an ancient script in a stone chamber near the dungeon's entrance. However, some parts were damaged and the writing needs to be translated. The man then adds that they also found an elixir that immediately healed his necrotic leg. However, Lan says that the first thing they need to do is interpret the ancient script. In response, the girl says that judging by the effectiveness of the remedy, the research is worth pursuing, and with more time, she will translate the text and try to recreate the remedy. Excited by her response, the Lord says that it seems he should trust her since she is so persistent. Happy with the comment, she replies that she will succeed no matter what. At that moment, he asks Linda to help her father treat the soldiers, and the girl agrees. With his hands on his hips, the boy says that the rest of the soldiers in good condition will search for treasure, stating that they can't leave the dungeon empty-handed. The soldiers, thrilled, cheer and celebrate. Sometime later, after the search, everyone is discouraged because they found absolutely nothing during their treasure hunt. The woman laughs at the protagonist while he says that he thought there was a good opportunity in this place, but apparently they've fallen into the depths of despair. Rondo informs them that they have finished all the preparations to return to the castle. Accepting the situation, Lan says they should head back and that being alive is good enough. The soldiers begin to leave the village along with their lord. They walk happily along the path, while the protagonist remains expressionless. Sometime later, back in the kingdom on a beautiful sunny day, in the palace of Lord Lan Albaran, he is lying on the grass. Tired, he says he's feeling a bit sleepy, while the spirit angrily tells him to train. Someone approaches the boy, catching his attention. It's Rondo, who informs him that the treasurer is waiting for him in his office. Annoyed, the Lord says he doesn't want to walk and tells Rondo to ask the treasurer to come here instead. Descending the stairs irritated, the treasurer is furious for having gone up to the office only to be told to come back down. Exhausted, he complains that his knee is in bad shape and yet he continues to be treated like a dog. After much physical effort, he reaches the castle's yard. The protagonist apologizes for meeting him like this, but argues that the sunlight is just too pleasant. Faking sympathy, the treasurer says it's no problem. Then Lan tells Rondo that he would like to speak with the treasurer in private. Following the request, the soldier begins to walk away. Changing his tone, Park says he was shocked when he went to the basement last night, which leaves Tommen quite scared by the comment. Sweating nervously, he asks His Majesty if something happened. The blonde man replies that the vault in the basement is completely empty. With a murderous aura, he says he thought the man would return the money he stole since he let him live. He continues, saying that while his lord was risking his life in a dungeon trying to make money, what was the treasurer doing? Terrified, the man apologizes, explaining that the money is spread across various assets and that it will take some time to gather everything. But the protagonist says that if anyone else overheard, they might think he was trying to steal from him when the money rightfully belongs to him, and the man simply agrees. Staring piercingly, Lan says that every time he thinks about the empty vault, he feels like killing him and appointing a new treasurer. He adds that it would be best for him to retrieve the money while he's still asking politely. Exuding a deadly aura, he asks if there's any problem and if the treasurer thinks this is unfair. Terrified, the man says there's no problem at all. Park continues, saying that the administrator mentioned that the residents are quite happy with the tax reductions, asking if the treasurer knows everything he's hearing because of him. He then concludes by telling him to do at least half of what administrator knows does. But Tommen responds, saying that this is unfair, questioning whether he really believes the administrator is innocent and that he's the only corrupt one. He then asks how he could have stolen the money without the administrator's help and claims that the village chiefs have closer ties to Nose than to him. Shattering any expectations, the Lord says that he already knows this because the administrator confessed everything last night, saying that Nose admitted to having done many wrong things over the years and that he revealed the full amount he took from the treasurer, promising to return everything. Len concludes that if that's all, the treasurer can leave, and the man simply obeys. As he walks away in anger, The treasurer mutters that he never thought Nose, an old fox, would change so quickly. Filled with rage, he vows to see how far Nose can go, and that when the old king dies soon, the nation will be in chaos as they try to decide the next candidate for the throne. He wonders if the young lord can truly defend his position amidst all that chaos. Sometime later in the kingdom, inside his office, the lord is with Linda. He tells the girl that he didn't understand a part of the text. Walking toward him, she gets very close and asks which part he's talking about. Nervous, he thinks she smells like flowers. Realizing which part he means, she explains that it's an ancient language and asks if he remembers when she wrote it for him to memorize. He says he does. Smiling, he tells her that thanks to her, his reading and writing have significantly improved, and Linda says she's relieved to hear that. Then the boy says he wants to give her something as a token of appreciation and asks if she would like anything. The girl says there is something she would like to ask for. She explains that she's having difficulty deciphering the ancient text they found in the last dungeon, and that she won't be able to solve it by just taking more time. She requests a specialist in ancient languages, saying that her father is experienced, but they need someone even better. She mentions that there is such a person in their lands and asks her lord to summon him, which leaves him quite confused. Curious, he asks where this person is at the moment. Embarrassed, the girl says that the specialist is in prison for fraud. She explains that according to her father, even though he's a swindler, his knowledge of ancient languages is unmatched. She adds that he was once a scholar who studied at the royal palace. The boy, curious, asks for his name. The girl responds that he is known as Alchemist Kane. Then we see Kane carrying some materials while a guard shouts at them to stop being lazy. He's dragging a tree trunk, struggling to pull it. A man strikes his back with a wooden spear, saying that it's revenge for yesterday, which irritates Kane. Kane approaches the man, grabs his entire face with one hand, and throws him to the ground with great force, knocking the man unconscious from the impact. Irritated, Kane says that the man isn't ready to kill him and therefore shouldn't challenge him. Then someone calls for the alchemist. It's several guards, and one of them orders the prisoner to lower his spear immediately. The man quickly obeys the order, but he still ends up getting hit. Several guards approach the man, delivering multiple blows with the butts of their spears. Sometime later in that same prisoner area, Kane is shirtless, covered in bruises from the beatings he received earlier. He then notices a serious bruise near his rib. He starts to extract liquid from a leaf, applying it to his wound like an ointment. Someone calls for him at that moment. It's one of the guards asking him to deliver something to the carriage because they need to go somewhere, and Kane grows suspicious. Sometime later, back at the Lord's office, Nose is there. He informs Lan that the captain of the guard has already left the village of Grom and is heading for the castle. Excited by the news, the Lord says they should reward the captain when he returns to the castle. He asks if it's not a great achievement to annihilate a group of 400 bandits, and Nose agrees but mentions that something about this situation troubles him. Curious, the blonde boy asks what he's referring to. Nose explains that it was a mistake to let the captain of the guard chase the bandit group through the Scarlet Gorge into the land of Lobelong. He says the Lord of Lobelong has always coveted their lands and fears that this incident might give him a reason to invade the kingdom. However, the Lord argues that this group had been killing and robbing in Lobelong regularly and asks if they didn't end up helping in some way. Nose, however, says that the Lord of Lobelong is not someone who cares about the people. He explains that if they enter into conflict with Lobelong, the residents will suffer greatly, and that the best option is to avoid this war at all costs. Frustrated, the Lord asks what he should do if he's supposed to kneel and ask for forgiveness. The administrators suggest they could send a messenger with appropriate compensation, which leaves the Lord displeased. Questioning how much this adequate compensation would be, Nose replies that it should be around 20,000 gold, which leaves Park completely shocked at such a high amount. However, Nose explains that it needs to be close to that figure to avoid offending the pride of the Lord of Lobelong. The blonde lord tells him to inform the treasurer. After the administrator leaves, the lord thinks that he should probably forget about rewarding the guards. Rondo enters the office, informing that the prisoner has arrived, and Lan instructs him to bring him in. They open the door, bringing in the prisoner, forcing him to kneel before Lord Lan. Lan stands up and tells the man to raise his head. Holding a piece of paper, Lan says he's heard that the man is an expert in ancient languages, and the man confirms it. However, Lan then asks why he lied 4 years ago to the merchant in Karmu, claiming he could make a stone golem. Kane confidently replies that he didn't lie and truly believed he could create one. Awkwardly, Lan asks why he didn't succeed, pointing out that the merchant trusted him and invested a lot of money for nothing. Bowing his head, Kane says that mistakes must happen for success, and that although the experiment failed, he didn't lie. Curious, Park asks what kind of golem he was trying to make. Looking at His Majesty, the man explains that a golem is an object that, although not human, can fight and work like one. He adds that golems don't sleep or eat, meaning they can work non-stop, and they can defend a castle or fight against monsters. He concludes that if they were created, they could change the world, leaving the protagonist in shock. Intrigued, the Lord thinks that it sounds like he's talking about a robot. Lan then asks if he could make something like that using magic. Correcting him, Kane says it's not magic, but alchemy. He explains that everything in this world can be transformed into something else, and that his research is in alchemy. which makes this transformation possible. He continues saying that some ancient alchemists had already made golems and had discovered the golden ratio of various elements that could alter the form of existing objects. Cain adds that he was on the verge of discovering this elemental ratio. A bit skeptical, the boy asks the spirit what she thinks of all this and whether it's true. Irritated, the spirit asks if he's been influenced by those words, calling him a weak fool. She then admits that the man isn't entirely wrong, acknowledging that ancient alchemists were known to manipulate objects and transform them into other forms. Looking at the sentence, Park tells Cain that he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and that it seems he has 6 years remaining. Then Park says he would like to propose something. He explains that they discovered an ancient text in a dungeon and asks if Cain could translate it. If Cain manages to translate the text, Park will remove the remaining years of his sentence and set him free immediately. He asks the man what he thinks of this proposal. Bowing his head, Cain agrees to the offer. Park says it's a good answer and orders Rondo to remove his shackles and take him to Nakarmo. Sometime later, at Linda's house, Cain is there eating bread. Nakarmo awkwardly tells him to make himself comfortable. As Cain eats, he asks if it was Nakarmo who recommended him to the Lord, and Nakarmo confirms. Cain then asks how Nakarmo knew about him. Nakarmo explains that it was a long time ago, and that a friend who was working at the royal palace had his help to translate an ancient medical document. Looking off to the side, Cain says he remembers that. He adds that he used all this free time to help them, but they shamelessly told him to cut his price in half. He mentions that he didn't translate it perfectly because of that, and the book turned into a useless piece of paper. He concludes by saying that Nakarmo should inform those people about what happens when they rob a poor student like that. Shocked, Nakarmo tells him that this friend has already passed away, which creates an awkward silence in the room. Holding an apple, Cain apologizes, saying that's a shame. Nakarmo also apologizes for such a talented student like him ending up in prison. However, Cain tells him not to worry about it, and that now he's going to finish the job his lord ordered and become a free man. He asks for the text they want him to translate, and Linda rushes to bring it immediately. Cain is analyzing the book as Nakarmo asks if he can translate it. Cain explains that the language was briefly used in the ancient Brateka region, and he believes he can determine what kind of remedy the experiment produces. Surprised, the doctor says they're really after a potion. Closing his eyes, Cain explains that the text is quite damaged, and because of that, it won't be easy to produce the remedy using only this material. But Linda begs him to translate it, yelling that she and her father desperately need the medicine. Cain, feeling drowsy after filling his belly, starts laughing, leaving everyone frozen in place. Later, in the same house, the young man offers Cain to share his room temporarily. As Cain removes his shirt, he asks if the young man is part of the family, noting they don't resemble each other much. The young man explains that he was abandoned by his own family and taken in by this one. As he lies down, he comments that they are good people. Annoyed, he asks Cain to get out of his bed, but the prisoner refuses, saying he slept on the floor for years and asks for just this one night. Crossing his arms, the young man says that for a scholar, Cain is rather rude and doesn't give the best first impression. Smiling, Cain retorts that the young man is also quite rude to study medicine right under a healer's nose. Frustrated, the young man introduces himself as Josh the Fighter and tells Cain to leave while he still has a chance. Turning over, Cain asks if Josh wouldn't rather learn alchemy, seeing as he has nowhere else to go. Mocking him, Josh asks if Cain will teach him the art of con artistry from Cain the Fraud. Closing his eyes, Cain philosophically responds, "Today's truth can become tomorrow's lie, and this morning's lie can become an irrefutable truth by the next day." This confusing philosophy leaves Josh deeply perplexed and increasingly irritated. Meanwhile, above the village tower, a green light appears. It's the protagonist Lan teleporting. Looking at the village from above, he wonders if today is the day he should leave Karmu. He teleports again, reappearing in another part of the village. Feeling pleased, he realizes his strength is increasing, allowing him to travel even greater distances in one go without much strain. Once more, he teleports from his position, appearing near the ocean. The woman's voice asks how much farther he plans to go. He replies, "Until I can see the ocean." Taking out a piece of paper from his pocket, he explains that the Southern Dominion lies near the ocean. Smiling, he says that since they come from so far, he wants to enjoy the sea breeze. Then he leaps off the cliff with great force. While still in midair, he activates his ability. Meanwhile, a ship sails across the ocean. It's a large pirate ship with many cannons along the sides. On the coast, several pirates gather as the captain excitedly announces that today's slave hunt will be easy. With arms spread wide, he declares that Albaran has some of the weakest defenses they've ever encountered. Clenching his fists, he vows to show how foolish the indebted lord is and says they will dismantle his defenses. He adds that slaves equal money, and that they should either dirty the product or fulfill their own desires. Otherwise, they'll end up as shark bait. One of the henchmen tells the captain that this is their first raid. The captain confirms and instructs them to go capture the slaves. At that moment, his daughter calls out to him. He asks where she's been, reminding her that these men will become her subordinates one day, but the girl says she has a better plan. Confidently, she suggests that in addition to kidnapping the slaves, they should capture the Lord of Albaran Castle as well. Looking at his daughter, the man tells her not to speak nonsense. He explains that even with few guards, they are strong enough to obliterate them before they reach the castle. Furthermore, he mentions that Charlene, the knight of the royal palace, is standing by, ready to strike. However, the girl insists that she will handle it, leaving the man in shock. The captain warns her that she cannot gamble with such a plan when she's the captain of the slave traders. But the girl argues that if they defeat Charlene, they will become famous. Concerned, the man says that fame will only bring more enemies. He adds that they're already making plenty of money and asks her what her problem is. The girl responds that she doesn't want to manage slaves. She wants to be a swordswoman. She reminds him that even he recognized her abilities. The man tells her not to rush things, assuring her that in a few years she will become one of the best swordswomen on the continent of Dansvania. He asks if she doesn't realize how much he's invested in making her the best. But the girl counters that a sword that doesn't fight doesn't grow, saying her master told her this. Frustrated, she walks away from her father, who yells after her, asking where she's going. The man screams for his daughter, Tazy, demanding that she come back immediately. Running after her, he continues to shout. Meanwhile, the protagonist teleports near the sea. Happy to be there. He says it would be even better if he had come during the day, mentioning that he should build a summer house in this location. He starts thinking about the future, imagining himself married, holding his children on the beach, and playing with them. Breaking the mood, the woman says he has small dreams and should have greater ambitions. But the boy argues, asking if she knows how big an ambition it is to get married and have a family. Disgusted, the woman tells him to use his head, reminding him that as long as he is a lord, he will always be the target of someone's ambitions. In response, the boy says that if that's the case, he will fight. He explains that in the land he once lived in, he lost everything, but now he won't lose anything more. That is his position. After that answer, an awkward silence fills the air, and the spirit remains quiet. Changing the subject, Lan suggests to the girl that they return to the castle to rest for a while. However, the protagonist notices flames in the distance, commenting that it looks like there's a fire in the village. The girl remarks that she's sure they will just take some seawater to put out the fire, and irritated, the boy asks what's wrong with her, acting so indifferent. Angry, he says that this is his land and that is his village. He then teleports from the spot. Using his ability, he quickly arrives at the village and sees the chaos unfolding before his eyes. One of the pirates tells his crew to take all the treasure. Then one of them grabs a child while her tied-up mother begs them not to take her daughter. The child cries for her mother and father, and meanwhile, the protagonist, in shock, just watches everything. He recalls when his own town was completely destroyed. He remembers running with his sister, but she fell to the ground as lightning coursed through her body. Sweating coldly, he realizes something. His sister was paralyzed as a monster approached. One of the monsters grabbed her while the protagonist hid, trembling and crying for not having done anything. Suddenly, all these memories come rushing back to him. Angry, he shouts, asking if they think this is their hunting ground and how they dared to do this in his land. Grabbing a dagger from his belt with a murderous look, he declares that they are in big trouble. Behind him, one of the pirates asks if the boy wants to become a slave too. But in a flash, the boy teleports, finishing off the pirate immediately, leaving the other pirates terrified, screaming to capture the boy. One of them grabs the boy from behind, claiming to have caught him, saying he'll break his back, but soon notices something strange is happening. Teleporting again with his power, the boy takes the pirate to another location. Terrified, the pirate drops his captive, then looks at the protagonist, who is exuding a deadly aura. Meanwhile, in the burning village, another pirate asks where the boy went. He suddenly appears behind him, holding a scythe, saying he just heard from the blacksmith that he wants everyone here eliminated. Without hesitation, he advances, taking down everyone in his path using 2 scythes. However, one pirate sneaks up from behind and strikes him in the back, telling him to die as he charges again. Irritated, Lan looks back, turning to deliver a fatal blow to 2 pirates at once. After the strike, they fall lifeless to the ground. The girl appears, telling him he still has a long way to go because he left an opening, and the boy asks why she didn't warn him. But the spirit responds, saying at least he got rid of everyone in this area. After the fight, he runs toward the tied-up civilians. He reaches one of them, untying them as they thank him. All the civilians express their gratitude for being saved. The boy then asks if they know who the invaders are. One person responds that they are slave traders working for Crom, and another says they took their family. Reacting to this, he declares that he will rescue everyone and tells them to focus on putting out the fire. Teleporting quickly, leaving everyone in shock, he arrives at the coast where the pirates are loading their future slaves. A pirate tells him to hurry up and get on board. Meanwhile, the captain sighs, saying he hopes his daughter hasn't really gone to the castle to fight Charlene. Remembering what his daughter said about wanting to be a swordswoman, he starts crying, calling her an ungrateful child. One of the men tells the captain to look. In the distance, a shadow is approaching the ship. Hopeful, the man asks if it's his daughter Tazy. Running excitedly, he shouts that she is welcome back and that she will have many opportunities in the future. However, he stops running when he realizes it's not his daughter. Seeing the hooded man, he asks who he is. In response, the protagonist recognizes that this is Crom, the human bat, the slave trader who roams the great continent and attacks coastal villages. One of the pirates draws his sword, stepping forward and orders the man to reveal himself now. But in an instant, the blonde passes through, taking down everyone in his path, leaving Crom in shock over what just happened. Lan says that it seems about 40 villagers were sacrificed. Nervous, Crom asks where his men are. The protagonist then replies that they are dead. Drawing his weapon and charging forward, the captain says that's impossible. Then Lan prepares to fight, landing a direct punch to the pirate's face. While holding his scythe in his left arm, he prepares, telling him that was just one punch and advising him to clench his teeth tightly. He asks if he really needed to live this way. With another punch to the face, he asks if there wasn't something better for him to do and how he dared detain his land like this. At that moment, several men observe the situation. The protagonist says they will meet their end tonight as he holds the man, who is already foaming at the mouth. Dragging him across the sand, he tells him he can't pass out yet. Throwing him into the sea, he orders him to open his eyes right now. The captain is lying in the water. He stands up frightened as Lan says he can't die easily. That's a luxury for people like him. Begging for mercy, the captain says he will never do this again. Not wanting to hear any of it, the boy grabs one of the wooden oars and prepares to finish the man off. A loud crash is heard. People on the boat start wondering what happened. Suddenly, Lan teleports to the ship, throwing the beaten captain to the ground. He begins to untie the civilians who thank him. One of them asks how they can repay him, asking for his name. The protagonist says his name is Hansung, telling them to call him that. He introduces himself as the shadow of Lord Albaran, saying the Lord will sell the ship and help rebuild the village, and that they should make sure to keep it. He also warns them to keep an eye on the captain instead of just killing him, as the Lord will send someone. The spirit appears, telling Lan that he's bleeding. Annoyed, he tells her to shut up. Coughing from embarrassment, he tries to continue what he was saying. Then he teleports, telling everyone to return home safely, which shocks everyone. As one man holds his son, he seems grateful to Lord Kyunsum. Sometime later at Linda's house, the girl is leaving home when she is startled by something. She can't believe her lord is there, and he apologizes for scaring her. He says he wanted her to take a look at his wound. Applying some ointment, she asks what happened, and he replies that he just got a little hurt. But the girl argues that it's not just a little. After finishing the procedure, she hands him an herb, telling him to chew it as it will relieve the pain. Disgusted, he asks if there's nothing sweeter since it's so bitter, and the girl tells him it's no time for jokes, asking him not to move. Then she asks if it hurts, and the boy says it's bearable. Worried, she asks if he got into another fight, and he replies that he just got hurt while training. She continues asking if he's hiding something, apologizing for asking too much, explaining that she just got upset because he got hurt. But he denies it, saying that if he were stronger, he wouldn't have been injured. The girl then says she has finished stitching him up. As she bandages him, he comments that he already feels healed. Annoyed, the girl tells him not to say such things and that he should avoid sudden movements for a while. Then he falls silent. He asks who she thinks is better, him now or before, but she says she doesn't understand what he means by that. Holding his coat, he explains that he's asking when she compares him before he lost his memory and now which one she prefers. The girl in turn asks if he's talking about whether she prefers the weak and sick lord or the lord who gets injured while fighting. She then begins to answer, saying she thinks she prefers the current lord, which catches the boy's attention. Smiling, he says he's happy with that. After getting dressed, he asks about how Kane is doing and if she thinks he'll be able to decipher the book. She responds that his skills exceed their expectations and that he truly is a linguistic genius, and that it's just a matter of time before the translated copy is completed. Happy, he asks if there's a higher chance of making the healing potion. She doesn't say anything, which leaves the boy confused. Smiling, he tells her not to put so much pressure on herself and that it's okay if there are mistakes. He continues, saying she should think of it all as a study, with no rush to make the healing potion, and that he's sure her results will be even better that way. Blushing, the girl agrees and says she'll do her best. Putting on his coat, he says he'll be leaving now. Linda then reminds him that he needs to make sure to rest well, and that they should postpone the tutorial sessions. But when she turns around, she realizes he's already gone. She wonders if he really left already. Then she notices something on the counter and asks if he left it behind. She finds the object very beautiful and feels happy. The next day in the kingdom, someone is riding a carriage through the village. A man gets off the carriage. It's the treasurer, looking for Nose. The two head toward the castle. Nose then mentions to the treasurer that he heard he's moving. Irritated, the man confirms, saying he's moving today. Nose remarks that it's a shame since the treasurer worked so hard to renovate his home, wondering how someone can change so drastically. Sweating with anger, the man tells the administrator that he's a traitor, siding with the lord and pretending to repent for his past actions. But Nose replies that it's a servant's duty to admit when they've wronged their lord. Then he asks Tommen if he knows the difference between them, asking the man if he knows what it is. Tommen just tells him to go ahead and say it. Nose explains that he comes from a family of knights who have served the Albaran family for hundreds of years, whereas Tommen does not come from such a lineage. The green-haired man questions how many years have passed since the Albera Knights disbanded. The administrator continues, saying that's why lineage matters and why the Lord's treatment and property are so different. Tommen says that Nose accepted his money for all these years and has now turned his back on the Lord, questioning why he's only changing now. Nose responds that he's only human, and that he disliked a weak Lord with no vision for the future. But now the Lord has changed, and logically, so must his servant. Not buying it, the treasurer says that Nose is just an opportunist, with no real determination. Nose asks if he still hasn't figured it out, even after being beaten by the Lord. Annoyed, Tommen asks why he's bringing that up again. Both men arrive at the door to the Lord's office. Rondo tells them that the Lord is expecting them. They enter the office, bowing their heads and greeting the Lord. Complaining, Lan says they should hurry when called and asks why they took so long, and they apologize. With a map spread out on the floor, the protagonist says he called them about a village. Pointing to it on the map, one of them asks if it's the village of Landon. Park explains that last night a group of slave traders ambushed the village with their men, leaving both men shocked. Lan adds that fortunately, the slave captain was captured and the rest of his men were killed, but the damage was still too great. Smiling, he asks them to review the damage in Landon and to come up with appropriate relief measures. Tommen, in turn, asks how he heard about this. Quickly, Lan asks if the treasurer is doubting him. Sweating nervously, Tommen says, of course not, but insists it's important to know the details. Lan replies that the news came from his shadow, who follows his orders, and that this same shadow was the one who captured Captain Crom and eliminated his men. Upon hearing this, the man is shocked that the Lord has a shadow who obeys him in this way, becoming irritated when he realizes she is strong enough to take down a slave trader and all his men alone. The Lord says they'll receive news from the south, but that he's already informing them in advance so everything can be prepared. Also tell Tommen that the ship the slave trafficker and his men used is anchored near the land and sea, and ask him to sell it to help the village, telling him to sell it for the highest price possible. Also ask if he knows what will happen if he steals again, and the frightened man says he does. Pointing his finger, he says it is quite shameful to have his slave trafficker invading his land and burning down an entire village, and that this is very similar to the case with thieves, questioning how weak they think his kingdom is for this to keep happening. Looking back, he says they must increase the number of troops by several thousand again. Nervous, Tommen speaks of finances. Tapping his cane on the ground, he orders the man to stay silent, saying that his father must have reduced the number of troops because it was appropriate at the time. But now it's different, with all these bandits scattered in various places along with the slave traffickers invading their lands. Because of this, they can't know when they will be in a civil war due to the problems with succession to the throne. He concludes by saying that the finances required for this increase in troops will be temporarily provided by the money Tommen owes him. He orders that Tommen must ensure everything is prepared without delay, and the man obeys. After speaking with Tommen, he calls for the administrator Nose. He tells him not to send 20,000 gold to Lobalon as they had planned, because they need every penny right now and can't afford more expenses to appease those arrogant ones. However, Nose argues that this could be used by them to invade their lands. Confident, Lan says that as long as that nation is trapped in chaos due to the succession to the throne, they will only save efforts to be attacked. He also says that if he were the Lord of Lobalon, he would be worried about ensuring his future is in good hands. Bowing Nose says he understands what he is saying, and that if this is his decision, he will just follow what was ordered. But he argues that the reason why the troops crossed the Scarlet Gorge has to be announced to Lobalong to avoid any future problems, and Park says he won't stop him, and that he can take care of it, saying he will discuss the details about the troop reinforcements with the captain of the guard, and that they must keep this in mind. The next day in the kingdom, the soldiers announce that the captain of the guard has returned. The captain tells his companion to dismiss the troops because he will allow them to spend the night in Karmu. Arriving at the castle, Rondo welcomes the captain of the guard. Then the man says he did a good job while he was away. Changing the subject, he asks where the Lord is. Rondo responds that he is in the underground training field. Surprised, the man asks if he is really there. Smiling, Rondo says he has changed a bit and not to be too surprised. Reacting to this, the man is completely confused by what he said. In the training field, the protagonist is practicing, making several movements with his sword, trading different strikes with it using his strength. Watching his training, the woman says it's great and that his strength has stabilized a bit. At that moment, he feels something coming. Looking back, he sees Charlene Depor approaching. He then begins to sweat cold. Charlene gets close to his lord. The woman tells him to be careful because this is the man who killed Lan's father, and the protagonist just remains silent. They stand face to face. Irritated, Lan just grips his sword tightly. The man stared at him with a frightening gaze, but quickly kneels, bowing to his majesty, saying that his servant Charlene has returned to his duty. In response, the blonde just sighs in relief that it was only that. Feigning sympathy, he says Charlene did a good job and that he was waiting for him. With his head down, Charlene says he crossed the Lovalong border during his duty and that he should be given an appropriate punishment. Smiling, Park says he already knows what happened and that if Charlene does something, he will reward him, not punish him. Extending his hand, he tells him to stand up. Greeting him, he says it is a great relief to know that he is protecting the lands, and the man looks confused. He continues saying that he is also grateful that Charlin did not abandon him even after his father's death. Charlin responds that he only protected the castle. But Lan says he doesn't need to be modest because he also knows things and says there is much work for them to do. Charlin obeys while his lord smiles. The lord then says he would like to discuss the future of his territory, but that they can do it tomorrow, saying that he can rest since he must be tired, and bowing, Charlin accepts to rest. At that moment, he starts to walk away. Watching from a distance, the protagonist just observes. Sometime later, in the main building of the guards of Albaran, inside his office, the captain is storing his cloak. Harmon enters the captain's office, who tells him to come in. Bowing, Harmon says he is glad the captain returned safely. Walking around the office, Charlin says he did a good job while he was away. Grabbing a bottle, he mentions that the Lord seems like a completely different person now. The man confirms, saying that they were also surprised at first, because his behavior, manner of speaking, and even the way he treats people changed a lot. Sitting with a glass of wine, he asks him to explain exactly what happened after the Lord regained consciousness. At the same time, in the castle of the kingdom, the protagonist says that the captain of the guard doesn't seem like a terrible man and questions if it was really him who killed the previous lord, while the spirit calls him annoying. The woman says that no matter how many times he says it, it won't change what she saw. Frustrated, the boy says he can't ask him and he doesn't know what to do, while the girl in the background sighs. The woman continues, saying that while she was with the emperor, she saw many heroes and traitors, and that they are all two-faced humans. But what really matters is how he will handle Charlene. Turning around, Lan asks what she means by that and states that there is no one to replace him at the moment. And besides, all the troops trust him greatly. He adds that the previous lord wasn't even his real father. He sees no need for revenge in this case, and the spirit agrees. He also says that he needs to use whatever he can and whatever has value. Mockingly, the woman agrees but says there's one more thing. That all of this makes sense, assuming that he won't be killed by the captain of the guard as well. At that moment, the protagonist is shocked and says nothing. Back at Charlin's office, he asks why the treasurer agreed to lower the taxes, and Harmon says he has no idea. He also asks if the Lord said anything more about his shadow that helped save the city, and Hasman says no and asks if he heard anything else. Charlene says he hasn't heard anything he can think of now. Hasman says he thinks the Lord is still keeping some secrets, because it's as if the shadow and the information system are providing news and information from the southern land. While swirling his glass, the captain of the guard says it is surprising that the Lord has had many changes in such a short period of time. The man says he can't remember how many times he was surprised to see the Lord. At that moment, Charlene recalls what he saw in the protagonist, saying that it's safe to say he's a completely different person now rather than just saying he's changed. Confused, Hasman asks what the captain means by a different person. Swirling the wine, he says it's literally what he said. It's as if he were a different person. Still not understanding, Hasman says that even if he were a twin, he couldn't have the same appearance as the Lord, including every part of his body, and they would have noticed if it were someone else. Smiling, the man says he's taking it too seriously, stating that he's just happy to see the Lord healthy again. He then tells Hasman he can leave, and Hasman bows, obeying the order. Now Charlene is alone in his office, a large and beautiful office. Sometime later in a gigantic temple, there is a fallen bell on the floor inside the church. Someone picks it up from the ground. It is a woman with long, gray hair. She notices someone approaching. Looking back, she sees the captain of the guard. He is walking towards the woman, asking if he can say a prayer. Extending her arm, she says he may enter. He then starts walking through the church, heading towards a statue and kneeling. At that moment, he begins to pray. In the background, the woman just watches, asking if he was the one who took care of the thieves. The man responds that he was. Smiling, she says he must have been bored spending all that time in the castle, and that he must have let loose with his sword while he was away. She asks him if it was fun. Staring at her, he asks if there was no contact. Laughing, she says she was risking herself just as much as he expected. Serious, the man says there have been many changes in the castle since, and that the treasurer who is funding them will no longer offer money. Handing her a bag, he says this is the last gold he is giving as a gift, and the woman says it's a shame because it was quite a large amount. Changing the subject, he says he has heard rumors questioning whether the Lord has changed. She says he should bring him sometime because she might try to recruit him. Looking back with a deadly stare, the man remains silent. In response, the woman says that's fine and asks him not to look at her that way. Irritated as he leaves, Charlene tells her not to make him suffer like the last time. He then rides away on his horse. The next day, several soldiers are passing through a forest. Korn, the slave trafficker, is all beaten up and tied. One of the soldiers says they still have a long way to go and that he should walk faster. At that point, Korn asks for shoes because his feet are hurting so much and he can't walk properly because of it. The soldier becomes very irritated, cursing him and calling him arrogant. Pulling on the rope tied to the man, who becomes very frightened. As he pulls hard, Korn pleads to walk and begs the soldier to stop pulling the rope. But the soldier tells him to walk until he can't feel his feet, and that whether he's in pain or not is none of their concern. However, someone suddenly strikes the soldier hard. Seeing who it is, the man is in shock. It's his daughter, who has come to rescue him, leaving her father overjoyed. Taze yells that she will give the soldiers only one chance to raise their swords. However, they prepare for battle. At that moment, the girl dismounts from the horse she was riding and faces them all with a sharp glare. At the same time in the kingdom, the Lord is in his office talking to his subordinates. Suddenly, someone bursts into the room calling for the Lord. Startled, he asks what's happening, and Rondo informs him that they received news that an unidentified woman appeared, attacking the troops who were transporting Korm and helping him escape. Hearing this news, the protagonist becomes irritated. Turning to the side, he asks Charlene if he thinks he can capture the man again. Charlene responds that he will send trackers immediately, but that it won't be easy because Korm is already far away. Irritated, the protagonist says he should have killed him. Curious, the treasurer asks what he meant by that, and the Lord says he was just talking to himself. Then he tells Rondo to ensure they recover the bodies of the men and compensate their families, and he obeys the order. Looking up, he wonders why they have so many problems. Notices the western lands have suffered from a severe drought for years due to the lack of an adequate water source, and that the villages of Hadil and Denjarun are fighting over the water reservoir located between them. Lan asks if these villages can't simply share the reservoir, but Nose explains that it was originally maintained and used by the village of Hadil, and the treasurer adds that if both villages use the reservoir, they would soon run out of water, and Hadil fears this will happen. The Lord in turn says that Denjarun doesn't even have a suitable source of potable water. Tommen explains that Hadil has a Bosyuva mine and asks if they shouldn't at least try to save that village. Park then asks Nose if he agrees with this. The administrator says that Nadyumet King can prevent a natural disaster, and since they don't know how long the drought will last, they need to ensure that the Bosyuva mine is protected. He continues, saying that Hadil is an important village that manages the mine, and as unfortunate as it is, this decision must be made. After hearing the response, Lan asks Charling what he thinks. Charling says that the Lord should do as he wishes. Shocked by the response, Lan asks if that's all he has to say, and Charling confirms. The protagonist falls silent. Tommen says that only 2 places are without water, so it shouldn't be such a big concern. In response, Lan tells the man to lie down on his stomach. Irritated, he orders him to lie down on his stomach. Frightened, the man lies down on the floor while Park prepares to hit him. He starts hitting the man, asking why he isn't concerned, saying that he has to be concerned on his behalf, while continuing to hit him more and more. Then he strikes the ground with his cane, saying that they all need to be concerned. Begging for mercy, the man, now red and crying, says yes. Len concludes by saying that until everything is resolved, Tommen shouldn't think about taking a single sip of water. Terrified, Nose calls for his lord, saying that at the top of Mount Panatino, there is a large lake formed from a volcanic crater, and they can take water from that lake to overcome the drought. Curious about this, Lan asks how they can get the water. Nose responds that there are ancient waterways in the lake at the top of the mountain, and that metropolitan cities and kingdoms are being fully supplied through these ancient waterways. Because in the past, our lands also used those waterways, which surprises the protagonist. Continuing the conversation, Nose says that, including the Karmu Castle and the western lands, when their land was prospering, the waterways were spread like spider webs all around. Confused, Park asks why they aren't using them anymore. Nose explains that about 100 years ago, they were polluted with poison, and most of the population of Karmu died during that incident. Therefore, since thousands of people died in that, the waterways in Karmu, as well as the others, were shut down. Crossing his arms, Lan says that it seems like there was an incident. Nose continues, saying that if they repair the waterways in the western lands and use them, they could greatly reduce the cost of getting water from the mountain lake. Pleased with this, the Lord says it's an incredible idea, and Nose thanks him. Raising his finger, he points out that, in addition, there is a problem. He explains that the king's 4th son, Prince Joseph, has been living in the royal village by the lake in recent years, and he says that if they use the water from the mountain lake, they will need Joseph's permission. Sighing, the Lord accepts that he'll have to swallow his pride this time. He then comments that since they're on this subject, he asks to schedule a departure for tomorrow, while wondering why a prince would live in the mountains. Hearing the entire conversation, Charlene remains quiet while observing the protagonist speaking. The day passes, and the group is riding toward the mountain. The Lord says he heard that Joseph came to this village when he became a lord, and Charlene confirms. The protagonist then asks how Joseph can stay out of the palace for 3 whole years being a prince, and if he doesn't have anything better to do. In response, the captain of the guard says that Prince Joseph didn't like to get involved in royal politics. Curious, Lan asks if when he says royal politics, he means things like succession to the throne, and Charlene confirms that it is indeed what he's referring to. Curious, the protagonist asks what kind of person Joseph is. Charlene then replies that he is someone wild and rude beyond limits. He explains that his blood is as hot as lava, and that he used to relieve himself by fighting in wars from a very young age. Shocked by the answer, Lan says that his administrator Nose didn't mention any of this to him. The captain of the guard explains that the reason is because Joseph entered the battle while hiding his identity, and the blonde says he would have been caught off guard not knowing. Lan then comments that this prince could be coveting his place on the throne since he is very strong. Disagreeing, Charlin argues that a person cannot become king solely and exclusively for their combat skills. Agreeing, Park says that indeed there are many problems wandering the land, and that ruling an entire kingdom must be very arduous. Sweating nervously, he realizes it will be a huge problem if Prince Joseph refuses to grant them access to the lake's water for their use. In his thoughts, he questions why such a terrifying prince chose his land to settle in after all. Lan, along with Charlane and several soldiers, continue the journey toward the lake. Along the way, he notices how severe the drought in this area is to the point where the ground is peeling away. He continues by saying that taxes in this state have increased and therefore his evaluation cannot be good. The horse begins to slow down. In front of a beautiful landscape with mountains in the background and a forest with water in front, Lan wonders what he is seeing. Charlane then responds that it appears to be the reservoir of the village of Hadil, and the protagonist comments that this is the place those two villages were fighting over. After seeing the view, they, along with the soldiers, start walking through the area. Park asks if the two villages are sharing the water, and Charlane replies that they probably both received the castle's carrier pigeons. Spotting something, Park wonders why they are gathered there. Several villagers are gathered in what looks very much like some sort of conflict. Irritated, the Lord questions why the people of these two villages dare to start a fight now. Arriving on horseback, Charlin orders the people to bow their heads because the Lord has just arrived. However, nothing happens at that moment. Curious, Lan asks where the village chief is. Bowing his head, a man named Tinto says he is the chief of the village of Hadlil and comments that it is an honor to meet the Lord in person. A man with short hair and a mustache also introduces himself, saying he is the chief of the village of Dengeron and his name is Dina. After the introductions, the Lord asks if they were fighting each other over the water reservoir, and both confirm that they were. Dismounting from his horse, he asks if they didn't receive the carrier pigeons sent from the castle, and Tinto replies that they did. Irritated, the blonde asks why they are fighting, saying that they were ordered to share the water supply from the reservoir. In response, the chief of the village of Dengeron, Dinan, shouts that the other village chief is disobeying the Lord's orders, which makes the other man extremely nervous. Continuing, this chief explains that even with the order to share the water, the chief of the village of Hadlil, Tinto, is refusing to give the villagers access to the reservoir. After hearing the entire explanation, Lord Lan asks if this is really true, drawing Tinto's attention. Very nervous, Tinto argues that he didn't deny access and that he only charged money for them to use it, because his village worked hard to maintain the reservoir. Lan then asks one of the chiefs what the village of Hadlil demanded in exchange for giving them access to the water supply. Responding to the question, Dinam, the chief of the village of Dengeron, says that they asked for a certain amount of silver per water container. He explains that it has been years since they had a good harvest due to the drought, and things have been very difficult for them since taxes increased. Nervously, the man says that if the villagers are forced to pay for water, they will have no choice but to leave their homes. Tinto apologizes to his lord and argues that if the other village uses their water supply without any payment, this reservoir would quickly dry up. However, Dianan tells Lan that what was said is not true and says it wouldn't be possible for them to waste the water, as it is saving their lives. With a strange smile, Tinto mentions that his village houses many miners from the Basuda mines. Bowing, he kindly asks him to mind his own business so that they can live comfortably, and the protagonist simply remains silent while listening to all this. Casually, he asks if the man is talking about the Basuda mines, and the man replies yes. Without even letting the village leader finish that small word, Lan orders him to lie face down, and the man is extremely confused by this command. Completely out of patience and highly irritated by everything he's heard so far, the protagonist yells, repeating the order. Grabbing a flag from the guard captain Charlane, Lan asks if the man thinks he should listen to all this just because of the Basuda mines. Hitting the man's spine with the flag, he says that he sent an order for them to share the reservoir, and as he speaks, the man suffers and tears up from the immense pain. Park asks if Lan ordered him to sell water to the other village, reiterating that if the Lord says so, it must be obeyed. He questions who the man thinks he is to cause all this trouble in his land. Turning to the other leader, the Lord orders the man to lie face down as well, just like the other one, which leaves him equally confused. Lying face down while being hit, the man cries, and Lan says that if the chief of the village of Hadil disobeyed his orders, he should have notified the administrator and waited, not brought weapons to a fight with the other village. After hitting them, the Lord tells them to stand up if they want the beating to stop. The two stand up, and Lan orders them to face each other. He states that even though they are from different villages, they are all his people, and he won't discriminate regardless of the situation. He says they should try to find some kind of solution together for the lack of water supply, and he cannot accept them abandoning their neighbors. Seeing the two men, the Lord orders them to hug. Following the order, they embrace even though they are completely uncomfortable with the situation, and in the background, Lan smiles, happy with this conflict resolution. He then tells everyone to hug each other, saying that their enemy is the drought, not the neighboring village. After these words, everyone embraces, apologizing to each other and accepting apologies as well, becoming a united and friendly people. Still irritated, Park asks Tinto if his house is far from where they are, and the man replies that it's not too far. Smiling, Lan says they haven't eaten yet and asks Tinto what he thinks of inviting him for a meal. Happily, the man replies that it would be an honor. Looking at the chief of the other village, Lan says he should join them for the meal, and Dinan, the man with the mustache, confirms his attendance. In a friendly gesture, Tinto extends his arm, showing the direction of his house to the Lord and Dinan. Seeing all this, Charlene just watches silently, without saying a word. Sometime later, the kingdom's soldiers, along with their lord and Charlene, are walking through the woods. Lan asks if the mountain resort used to be a place used for the kingdom's exile, and the captain confirms this information. The lord continues by mentioning Joseph's stance on not getting involved in royal politics, but questions why he is in an exile location. He quickly stops talking upon seeing how beautiful the place they are in is. With a panoramic view of the entire stunning landscape consisting of the cliff, lake, forest, and a house below, he is impressed by the scenery. Saying that it's a beautiful view, he is astonished that they chose such a lovely place to serve as an exile location. Suddenly, some horsemen arrive at the scene, blocking the lord's path. A man with a beard and mustache calls for Charlene and says that they haven't seen each other in a long time. In response, the captain of the guard says it's good to see him again and introduces the protagonist as the Lord of Albaran. The other man bows, greeting the lord and introducing himself as Mactero, a servant of Prince Joseph. Happily, Park says it's a pleasure to meet him and that he came from Albaran specifically to see Prince Joseph, asking if he is inside the house. Mactero confirms, but says that in order to see the prince, Park will have to leave his guards behind before going up. Having no problem with this, the young lord agrees and asks if he can bring Charlene with him, but the captain doesn't seem too thrilled with the idea. Without hesitation, Mactero says that the prince would prefer it that way. After this exchange, they begin walking toward where Prince Joseph is. On the way, the blonde hums a tune to entertain himself. Upon arrival, Mactero says they can leave their weapons with him before entering and asks them to wait for a moment. Sighing, Lan admits that he's a bit nervous about the situation as he has heard that Joseph is a crazy prince. Reassuring the boy, Charlene says that Joseph's killing intent is overwhelming, but he doesn't reveal it outside the battlefield, and if he did, he'd be a serial killer. Excited by this response, Park asks if they are close, which ends up startling Charlene. The captain coldly and directly responds that they are not very close, which irritates the young lord. At that moment, someone opens the door, apologizing to the lord for the delay. It is a red-haired woman dressed entirely in black, and she introduces herself as Cheyenne, a servant of Prince Joseph, kindly inviting them inside. Accepting the invitation, both enter the house where the prince is, accompanied by the friendly red-haired woman. Knocking on his door, she calls for His Highness, informing him that Lord Albaran has arrived. She then opens the door to Joseph's office. The man is grabbing a book from his shelf. Having his expectations completely shattered, Lan wonders in his mind if this guy is really Prince Joseph. Quickly, the spirit appears, saying it can feel a great amount of strength coming from this man. Continuing, it says she should have stayed with him instead of a small-town lord like the protagonist, which irritates Lan. Both Park and Charlene kneel before the prince, saying it's a pleasure to meet him, and the young lord introduces himself as Lan, the Lord of Albaran. Turning around, Joseph says it's a pleasure to meet the lord. He also mentions that it's good to see Charlene is doing well. He then calls for Cyan, kindly asking her to bring food and drink for their guests, to which she agrees, saying she'll do so right away. Curiously, the prince asks why the lord has come all this way to see him. Lan replies that he's here to solve the drought that has been affecting the western region of Albaran. He explains that because the drought has lasted for many years, some villages have begun to conflict and duel with each other over water. The prince remarks that the lord must be very worried. In response, Lan says that he's indeed very worried, and that's why he wants to take the water from the lake and transport it through the ancient waterways. Extremely confused, Joseph asks why he doesn't just do what he wants, since it's his land. Reacting to this comment, the boy is completely shocked, while the woman laughs, saying that Joseph is cold and definitely her type. Bowing, Park thanks him, and Joseph says he hopes the rain comes soon to finally relieve these lands suffering from the drought. However, he comments that he heard the Lord of Albaran was sick. This surprises him, as Lan doesn't seem sick at all upon seeing him. Changing the subject, the boy starts poking his own face, saying that it was all thanks to his healer, who did an excellent job curing him. Then Prince Joseph says that if his older brother had met the Lord's healer, he might have had a different fate as he passed away. Saddened, Joseph comments that this is truly regrettable. Quickly changing the subject, he asks the Lord who he supports. He asks if Lan supports the princes or the great lords, which catches the young lord's attention and makes him start sweating. Sitting down, Lan says he hasn't had much opportunity to think about those matters yet. He continues, explaining that he recently recovered and has just begun to take care of his land. With his eyes closed, Joseph says that makes sense, but that in any case, the young lord should prepare himself. Staring at the lord with his sharp eyes, Joseph adds that this battle will be very difficult. Witnessing the prince's piercing gaze, Park becomes nervous and Charlene remains silent, saying nothing. Breaking the tense atmosphere, Cheyenne arrives with a bottle and glasses, apologizing for keeping them waiting. Handing over a tray, she asks if they eat raw fish. Preparing to eat, Lan says that he does and that he used to enjoy this dish so much in the past that he would eat it constantly. Hearing this, Joseph remains silent. Without hesitation, the young lord begins eating and is surprised by how good it is. While pouring wine into the lord's glass, Joseph smiles and says he's glad to finally meet someone who likes raw fish, and Lan thanks him for his kindness. Joseph explains that Mactero made the wine, so its taste might not be refined, but it should still be drinkable. Extending his arm, he looks at the guard captain and says it's been a long time, inviting him to drink with them. Focused, Charlin says he's working at the moment and explains that he can't drink while on duty, apologizing for it. Prince Joseph comments that Charlin is still too hard on himself and that this is not good. Putting his wine glass down on the table, Joseph remarks that today is the only day they'll be able to enjoy this food and drink, which prompts Lan to ask what he means by that. The prince explains that, as he mentioned before, some things have happened and he must return to the royal palace. Smiling with joy, he says it feels like destiny that the Lord came to see him today, because if it had been a day later, it wouldn't have meant. Holding his wine glass, he proposes a toast. They both raise their glasses of wine, and Joseph says this toast is to the kingdom and the fate of them both. After all the friendly conversation outside the house, Lan tells Prince Joseph that he can visit his castle in Albaran anytime he wishes. Thanking him for the invitation, Joseph expresses his gratitude but comments that all the other lords hate him, yet it seems Lan is an exception among them. Changing the subject, he tells Charlene that he always wanted to train with him and that it's a shame he left the knights while Joseph was away. Charlene responds, saying that he cannot compete and cannot win against His Highness's sword. Crossing his arms and sighing, Joseph says that's why it's fun to train with a guard captain. He then tells the Lord of Albaran to take care and that he looks forward to seeing him again. Happy, Park says that he too is eager for that day to come. After their conversation, they leave the place with their soldiers. Sometime later in the kingdom of Albaran, heavy rain begins to fall. The rain pours as they ride through the forest with their horses and soldiers. Something catches the attention of one of the soldiers, who looks into the forest. From the top of the tower, the bell begins to ring, announcing that their lord is returning. They start to enter the kingdom on their horses. Relieved, Park seems happy yet tired as they finally arrive in his kingdom. This catches Charlene's attention, who asks his lord if something is wrong. Smiling, Lan reassures him, saying he's just happy to be back. Upon arriving at the castle, the butler greets him kindly and informs him that he will prepare his bath, while the woman arrives with a towel for him to dry off. Lan says he is very tired and asks for help drying his hair, telling the woman he'll bathe tomorrow, while she dries his feet and the butler removes his coat. After this, Park, exhausted, walks toward his bed. Throwing himself onto the bed, he starts laughing with joy at finally being home, stretching out. Then he mutters to himself, turning to the side, saying, "Home sweet home." Nearly asleep, he is happy to be in his own home, his own castle. He sleeps peacefully with the gentle rain in the background, which must be a soothing song to his ears. The next day, a bright and beautiful sun shines over the kingdom after all the rain from the previous day. Led is in his office talking to the administrator, Nose, and his treasurer, Tommen. Nose mentions that there was a small fire in the northern lands mountain near the Kalit quarry. He continues, saying that the fire was extinguished quickly, but it still burned down some buildings located at the quarry. Very tired, Park asks if anyone was hurt in the incident. Tommen responds that no one was injured, but financially it was bad because the marble warehouse caught fire, meaning they can no longer supply marble to the merchants. Trying to resolve the situation, the protagonist mentions that marble is a type of stone and asks if they could just wash it and sell it. Nervous, the treasurer explains that unfortunately, the marble was already cut into finished slabs, and most of them are either broken or at least cracked. Tapping the table continuously, the young lord asks about the extent of the loss, wanting to know the numbers. Sweating, Tommen replies that, excluding the expenses for reconstruction, the loss they suffered with the marble amounts to around 5,600 gold coins. Lan then instructs the treasurer to inform the merchants about the situation and let them know they'll need to delay deliveries. The man acknowledges the order but adds that there's more. He begins talking about the slave trader Kron's ship, and an irritated Park comments that he thought the man had already sold that ship to the neighboring state. Looking downcast, Tommen explains that while they were on their way to exchange the property titles, the ship was stolen by pirates. Hearing this absurd response, the young lord is left in complete shock and confusion, questioning if Tommen lost the ship. The treasurer confirms it and says that furthermore it's been reported that the slave trader Kron was on board the pirate ship, which catches Park's attention. A bit apprehensive, Tommen mentions that it seems Kron asked the pirates for help, and as he listens to the entire explanation, the protagonist slouches in silence. Completely furious, he questions whether there was this much work before or if all the workload increased as soon as he became a lord. Seeing his lord suffering, Tommen laughs internally, thinking that Park should keep suffering like this. In his thoughts, Tommen continues, saying that the more the lord suffers and his possessions burn, the faster he'll realize how much work the treasurer has had. Turning to Tommen, Park, visibly irritated, asks if he's laughing by any chance and startled by the question. Tommen doesn't understand what he means by it. Burning with rage, Lan orders the man to lie on the ground and still shocked, Tommen asks why. Without hesitation, Park kicks him in anger, yelling that he told him to sell the ship and questioning why he's laughing about it being stolen. Hitting him with a rod again, the young lord asks Tommen if he knows how much it costs to recruit more soldiers and repair the waterways in the western lands. The spirit says she warned him and tells him to leave this stupid land and search for the dragon's eye, to which Park responds by telling her to be quiet as he continues to hit the treasure. After beating him enough, he throws the rod on the ground, watching Tommen tremble from the beating. Clenching his fists, he orders Tommen to find out who stole the ship and where they can locate those people, telling him to do it now. Trying to calm down, Park thinks that he's so angry that only seeing Linda will calm him at this moment. Someone begins knocking on Linda's door and she goes to answer it. Opening the door, she is surprised to see her lord there, and he greets her. Blushing, Linda explains that she had planned to visit him as soon as she heard he had returned, and smiling, Lan says he came to take a walk. With good news, Linda tells him that Kane has finished translating the entire ancient text except for the parts that were damaged. Happy to hear this, the young lord asks if she will finally start her medical research. She responds that yes, they will begin creating the tools mentioned in the ancient text while experimenting with new herbs. Park asks if she can call Kane for him, as the man kept his promise and he needs to do the same. Some time passes. Kane stands in front of his lord and thanks him for everything. The lord then says that he won't let Kane stay if he finds out the translation was poorly done. Nervously, Kane replies that's fine, but he has something to tell the lord, which leaves Lan confused. Kane begins to explain that people have called him a fraud, but that's not true because results can't be expected without mistakes, and with support, he can succeed. A bit skeptical, the young lord questions whether Kane is talking about this again. Bowing, Kane asks the young lord to become his sponsor, leaving Lan confused once more. Explaining, Kane says he is close to discovering the elemental ratio for material transformation, and if he keeps experimenting, the stone golem will appear. Throwing cold water on the idea, Lan replies that he's sorry, but he can't sponsor without guarantees of success, and simply saying that persistence is enough to make a stone golem isn't convincing. Curious, Kane asks the lord what he should do then. Lan responds by telling him to prove himself by building something and showing it to his lord. It needs to be enough to make him a bold adventurer. Sometime later at the house of Nakarmo and his daughter Linda, the purple-haired young man tells Kane to give up on this idea since he couldn't even get the lord to sponsor it. Kane argues that the lord gave him an opportunity. Crossing his arms, the young man asks how Kane will prove he can actually create a stone golem, to which Kane responds that he has something in mind. Looking back, the young man asks if he's still going to stay here, wanting to know what he's going to do. The young man replies that he's still thinking about it since he owes quite a bit to Nakarmo and his daughter Linda. Kane says the young man doesn't have the potential to be a healer and suggests that if he becomes his assistant, they could get rich together. But sighing, the young man says that a man must remain loyal. Kane continues, saying that if the young man finishes creating his stone golem, he'll gain fame and incredible riches. Convinced by these words, the young man bids farewell to the Nakarmo family, thanking them for everything. Completely furious, Nakarmo calls him a disloyal scoundrel, which frightens the young man. Apologizing, the young man says he thinks he's done enough, having watered and fertilized the herbs and regularly cleaned the house. But the man remains angry, questioning whether the young man thinks he'll get rich by following Kane and saying he will only suffer. Linda, standing by, is shocked by her father's behavior. Intervening, Kane tells the man to stop. In a gentler tone, Linda tells her father that he should respect Josh's decision. Radiating positive energy and happy with everything, Linda tells Josh that she hopes he stays healthy wherever he goes, leaving the young man a bit flustered. The young woman tells Kane that she hopes to see him again, and Kane responds that overcoming a challenge is a beautiful thing, and then he hopes she succeeds with her healing potion. Grateful, Linda thanks Kane kindly. Breaking the emotional moment, Kane asks Nakarmo for a loan. Nakarmo begins rummaging through his pockets, which irritates Josh. Handing Kane a bag of money, Nakarmo says it's a token of gratitude for translating the ancient text up until now, and that he doesn't need to repay it. Overjoyed with the gesture, Kane hugs him tightly, saying he hopes they meet again. After the warm farewell, the two set off on their alchemist journey. They head to a market to buy food. Kane points to an empty cart with various things. The man pulls the cart as he walks. Josh comments that Kane's house seems quite far away, but Kane assures him they're almost there. Suddenly, the young man hears the sound of bells nearby. Frightened, he yells at Kane, asking if they really needed to take this path, and Kane doesn't understand what he means. The young man explains that he hears the bells and that the Kia temple is in this forest. The followers there worship the goddess of death. Looking back, Kane calls him a scaredy cat. In shock, the young man insists he's not scared but believes in Mare, the goddess of life, and therefore must stay far away from the Kia temple. Distancing himself from the cart, Josh begins running to catch up, telling Kane to take him along. Sometime later in a castle, Kane assures Josh that they will be quick. He stands in front of a gray-haired woman, the same one who was speaking with Charlene a few chapters ago. She remarks that it's been a while since she's seen Kane. Kane calls her sister, saying it's been years, yet she still looks the same. Curious, she asks when he was released, and Cain responds that it was recently. He explains that he was freed after completing a task for the Lord, and the woman says she understands. Changing the subject, Cain comments that this place still feels quite grim. He then says that once he completes the stone golem and becomes rich, he'll make a large donation to the temple, and the woman says she's happy just to hear that. Turning to the side, Dylan asks who the young man in the background is. Cain introduces him, saying his name is Josh, and that he has decided to help him with the stone golem project. Cain then tells Josh to greet this lady, who is named Dylan, his only neighbor and a nun of the Kia temple. Josh greets her. The woman says it's a pleasure to meet him, and that if he ever needs anything, he should just call on her, adding that the goddess Kia will always welcome him. Nervous about the situation, Josh explains that he is a believer in Mare, the goddess of life. Changing her expression, the woman warns that the goddess of life will not protect him forever. After saying that, she begins to leave, walking up the stairs. Josh remains silent, just watching her. Quickly, Cain slaps Josh on the head, telling him to snap out of it. Annoyed, Josh asks what's wrong with him, and Cain explains that Dylan is not an ordinary woman. He further explains that she's actually a sorceress, and she's currently kneeling before a statue inside the temple. Cain tells Josh that they should go as they're almost there, and Josh simply agrees. Meanwhile, back at the Nakarmo family house, the Lord is there with Linda. Holding something mysterious in his hand, Lan asks if what he's holding is a drink. Linda replies that yes, it is, and explains that spirits are used to disinfect and anesthetize, as well as to make medicines. He then asks if he can drink it. Confused, Linda turns to him and says it's a very thick drink to consume that way. With a sickened expression, Lan agrees with Linda, and she, surprised, asks if he's already tried it. Smiling, Lan says he has some wine and can serve it instead of the thick drink. Park thanks her. As Linda serves the wine, Lan vents about how he keeps drinking to relieve the stress and worries caused by his position in the state. Linda explains that drinking won't solve anything and that he should reduce his consumption, but Park invites her to drink with him. He mentions that he tends to drink more when he's alone, and Linda accepts the invitation, saying it would be an honor. After serving themselves, both start drinking and enjoying the wine, which seems to be very good. After they had the wine, Linda appears slightly tipsy and says that if it weren't for that incident, the state would be in a much better financial position than it is today. Surprised by her words, Park asks which incident she's talking about. Feeling a bit awkward after saying that, Linda explains that he would be sad if he knew, but Park presses, asking what could possibly bring him down and reassuring her that she doesn't need to worry about that. In a serious tone, Linda says that this is something only the two of them know, but since he lost his memories, he likely doesn't remember. Getting closer to her and still very surprised, Park asks if it's really something only the two of them know, and Linda reiterates that yes, it is, and that he had asked her to keep it a secret. Trembling, she begins to explain that the previous lord before passing away was busy paying off his debts to the great Lord Bonin. As a result, when the state was under severe financial pressure, he decided to sell the family treasure. Upon hearing this, Lan is shocked to learn about this treasure. Linda explains that King Linham, who founded this country hundreds of years ago, gifted the Lord of Albaran an enchanted shirt. According to legend, this garment was made with ancient magic designed to protect its wearer from many dangers. As she continues explaining, the protagonist is amazed that such a powerful item actually exists. Continuing the story, Linda says that the first lord kept the enchanted shirt a secret for many generations so no one would try to steal it. However, the previous lord likely chose to sell it to pay off his debt to the great Lord Bonin. Determined to do so, he entrusted the former captain of the guard, named Minun, to carry out the task in absolute secrecy. At this point, Lan asks if this former captain of the guard, Minun, is the predecessor of Captain Charlene. Linda confirms this, adding that after receiving the enchanted shirt from the Lord and being instructed to sell it in the kingdom, Minun vanished. Surprised, Lan asks if the man fled with the enchanted shirt, and Linda confirms that he did, as he betrayed the Lord. Following this incident, the previous Lord was deeply shocked and never spoke of it again, and to this day, Minun remains missing. Linda continues, saying that if the shirt had been sold as planned, the state would be in much better financial shape, and that this is the story Lan had repeated many times. Still shaken by the situation, Park asks why they haven't searched for this person. The girl explains that they certainly tried to search for Minun, but after the former lord passed away 3 years ago, she heard that the search for Minun stopped completely. Reflective, the lord wonders about the former captain of the guard fleeing with the enchanted shirt, and the current captain having assassinated the former lord, leaving him perplexed about the reasons behind it all. Continuing the conversation, Linda hesitates but then decides to tell him something important. She mentions that a merchant saw a man who perfectly matched Minun's description a few months ago. Standing up, surprised and agitated, Lan asks where this happened, and Linda responds that it was in the kingdom of Denaware. She adds that the merchant was traveling with a group of mercenaries, and the captain of that mercenary group resembled the former captain of the guard, Minun. Deep in thought, the Lord realizes that a thief who fooled with a valuable enchanted shirt working as a mercenary captain abroad likely means that Minun decided to keep the shirt instead of selling it. Engaged in the topic, Park asks Linda if she knows the name of the mercenary group she mentioned. Sometime later, back at the castle, Lan is in his office, talking with the treasurer, who informs him that they have found the pirates who stole the ship along with the slave trader Crom. The young lord then asks who these people are. Tommen responds that this group of pirates call themselves the Blue Shark Pirates, and they are led by a man named Shavich. He adds that these pirates are part of the pirate archipelago. And confused, Park asks what this pirate archipelago it is. The treasurer explains that it's a place where dozens of pirate groups gather, with over 10,000 pirates living there. Together, they could even challenge the Royal Navy. Starting to understand, the protagonist asks if it's like a floating pirate kingdom in the middle of the ocean. Continuing, the treasurer says that there seem to be many internal conflicts within the organization, and they don't appear to be very united at the moment. Lan comments that they should capture Shavich of the Blue Shark Pirates to get information about Crom, and the treasurer confirms that they can do that. Dismissing the man, Park praises him for a job well done and says he can leave, and Tommen follows the order. As he leaves the office, Tommen thinks that the Lord has lost his mind, wanting to confront a group that even the Royal Navy fears. He wonders if Lan will send his shadow assassin. Smiling wickedly, Tommen considers sending a letter to the pirate archipelago just as a precaution. Annoyed, he starts to walk away, laughing about his plan, but Lan hears everything from his office, commenting that Tommen is laughing in that stupid way again and is probably scheming something. Bothered, Lan remarks that if Tommen is going to do something foolish, he should at least disguise it better so it's not so obvious. Suddenly, the spirit appears, and Lan asks her about the pirate archipelago, wondering if it existed in her time. Blazer responds that no, she had never heard of it before. Clenching his fists, Lan comments that either way, these people are practically dead, and he'll put holes in their pirate ships when he finds them. However, the woman politely asks him not to do anything reckless, reminding him that just because he can teleport now doesn't mean he should take many lives lightly. Curious, Park asks if she's worried about him. Irritated, Blazer says she's only worried that there will be no one left to search for the dragon's eye after he dies. Fearful, the young lord says he heard her. Excited, Park says that's great because he's running out of money, and now he has the opportunity to steal from the pirates. Later that night, at the royal castle, Lan is in his office with the spirit. Blazer asks how he intends to reach the pirate archipelago, as it's far from the coast and in the middle of the ocean, making it difficult to teleport directly there. Studying the map, Park notes that the pirate archipelago is closer to Limong port in the kingdom of Benanin. Determined, he says he'll search for ships in Limong first, and that he might even disguise himself or something like that. Curious, Blazer asks what's in the kingdom of Denaware, and the protagonist explains that he's also going to look for the enchanted shirt. He adds that he'll inquire whether the mercenary captain Soren is actually Minun or not. While twirling a knife, he states that if Soren is Minun, he'll take the shirt, and if Minun sold it, he'll take the money. But if Minun has nothing, stabbing the knife into the map, Lan declares that he'll kill him. The next morning in the kingdom, Park mentions that he will patrol the land for a while. He adds that he will personally check how things are going. Knows the administrator says that he will prepare a list of villages for him to visit and inform him soon. However, Park responds that it won't be necessary as he plans to hide his identity while wandering, which surprises Nose. The administrator asks about the guards, and Lan replies that he doesn't want to be accompanied by any guards during his patrol. Charlin comments that he understands his lord's intention, but his subordinates will feel uneasy if he decides to go without protection, asking him to reconsider. Lan reassures the captain of the guard, saying not to worry as he knows how to protect himself, leaving Charlene silent and surprised. Charlene thinks about how several soldiers, including Rondo and Harmon, witnessed the lord wielding a sword. Staring sharply at Lan, he wonders if the person in front of him is truly Lan Albaran. Sometime later, the lord is near his soldiers. His butler approaches, handing him a package and says that it contains camping equipment, emergency rations, and money. Linda, on her part, hands him an ointment, saying it's for his wounds, and asks him to try not to get hurt. Park replies that he will be careful. Concerned, she asks if he's going to search for Minun, leaving the protagonist surprised and in a tight spot. Pretending to be innocent, the protagonist says he won't do that since the kingdom of Denaware is too far. As he departs, he waves to his subordinates and friends, who wish him a good journey. Later at night, inside a house, a bright blue light suddenly appears. A bearded man is holding a hammer imbued with some blue energy. He is forging a material using magic. It seems to be some kind of weapon. Focused, he observes his work in silence. He prepares to continue forging the material, using the magic imbued in the hammer. Upon impact, many sparks fly out. Suddenly, energy surges toward the ceiling, breaking it due to the immense concentration of power. The energy is so intense that after breaking through the ceiling, it shoots up to the sky, affecting the local weather. Afterward, the man examines the material and realizes it's been shattered due to the impact. Analyzing the situation, he wonders if this was his 8th failure. Putting the hammer away, he thinks that if he could recreate and use the magic staff of the great sorcerer Kanan, he might be able to seize the throne for himself. A soldier enters the room addressing Lord Rolmain and informing him that a report has arrived from the Callan fortress, catching the man's attention. Rollman comments that it won't be long before they find Prince Joseph's party. Nervously, the soldier simply replies, yes. With a shrewd look, the bearded man says that the loss of one of the royal princes might not be such a bad idea after all. At the same time, the protagonist is walking like a wanderer under the rain. He travels through various places in the downpour. As he descends some stairs, he says that since it's raining, it would be better to camp here for the night. Surprised, the woman's spirit appears, commenting that this place seems to be an ancient historical site. Suddenly, the blonde protagonist draws his sword, which emanates a blue energy. Showing the sword, he asks what she thinks, and if his strength has stabilized significantly. She replies that it still seems too early for him to learn the Emperor's swordsmanship. Something catches Park's attention. Pressing his sword, imbued with energy, directly onto a piece of wood, he heats it up. From this, he creates a torch, and as he observes it, he says he should look around. Walking through the ancient historical site, he notices a spider web. As he continues, he reaches a kind of cliff with a chasm separating him from a bridge far below. The woman comments that the bridge is broken. Emanating a green power, Park remarks that it's not a problem for him. He quickly teleports to the broken bridge. Standing on the other side, he says that this side feels completely different from where he was before. The woman comments that it seems no one has come to this place for a very long time. Something catches his attention, sparking the protagonist's interest. Seeing a kind of magical cube radiating energy, he asks what it is. Sometime later, Lan is sitting on the ground in front of a campfire he made with a torch from earlier. Holding the cube, Park comments that it's warm, as if someone had heated it earlier. Showing the artifact, he asks Blanzer if she knows what it is, but she promptly replies that she has no idea. Excited, Park wonders if this stone could be enchanted, just like the shirt from the ancient story. Suddenly, he hears a noise that catches his attention. Looking back, he sees a large, unidentified man walking toward him, holding some kind of weapon. When he realizes who it is, the protagonist is surprised. It's Mactero, wounded and exhausted. Park notices the man's injuries and asks what happened to him. Falling to the ground, Mactero says that some men were hunting Prince Joseph, and this information leaves the Lord shocked and scared. Park quickly asks if His Highness is alright. Shaken, Mactero admits he's not sure, as they got separated during the fight and he didn't expect to find his lord in this place. Mactero urgently asks if Charlene is with him as they need the captain's help. However, Lan replies that, unfortunately, he is alone for some reasons. Surprised, Mactero stands and asks if it's true that he's by himself, and Park confirms it with a bit of regret. As Mactero moves to extinguish the fire, he tells the Lord to stay hidden because the men who attacked the prince are roaming the area. But noticing some strange movement, Lan says it seems it's already too late for that. At that moment, several hooded figures wearing cloaks arrive at the scene. The spirit remarks that there are many of them, dozens at least. Taking the lead, Mactero tells his lord to stay behind him and not stray too far. However, Park comments that he's become a burden for the soldier. Looking back, Mactero apologizes, admitting that now the Lord is in danger because of him. Preparing for combat, Mactero yells that if the Lord has a chance to escape, he should do so without hesitation, as Mactero will fight these scoundrels to the end. Quickly, he begins to imbue his weapon with a blue force. Afterward, he spins his weapon, creating a vortex of energy. Furiously, Mactero shouts at the hooded figures to take that. He throws his weapon, striking one after another with ease. Seething with anger, he challenges them to fight him, cursing them as filthy idiots. As he approaches one of the men, Mactero lands a fatal blow with his weapon, fully charged with energy, but someone in the background seems to have a trick up their sleeve. One of the men steps forward, imbuing his weapon with a red force. With a single strike, he breaks the chains of Mactero's weapon. Wearing a menacing mask, the hooded figure threatens to give Mactero the most painful death possible. Seeing this, Mactero is both scared and nervous about the situation. In a state of shock, Mactero tells the Lord that his fate must end here, dying alongside this bastard, Crody, and urges the Lord to flee immediately. However, Park suddenly teleports in front of the knight, shouting why he should die and telling him to rest as he'll take care of the rest. Park quickly draws his sword, imbuing it with energy, displaying a significant amount of power. He leaps toward his opponent. Already in the air, he prepares for his strike. Surprised, the hooded figure asks the young man who he is. Without hesitation, Park makes his attack with his sword, fully charged with energy. But the blow is blocked by the hooded figure, who also wields a weapon imbued with red energy, unlike Park's blue. Watching the fight, Mactero is impressed by the strength and skill of his lord. Deflecting the attack, the man calls the young lord a wretched brat. With a murderous gaze, he vows to kill him. Both fighters engage in a direct offensive, each wielding their weapon charged with a special force. They begin an intense sword fight. As they clash swords, they also defend simultaneously. Since both swords are imbued with energy, the impact between them is immense and powerful. While trying to fend off the attack, the hooded man realizes he's losing strength. He quickly leaps back, trying to escape the overwhelming blow. With his arm injured from the strike, the man remarks that the young protagonist isn't too bad after all. Confidently, the blonde simply responds that the hooded figure, on the other hand, is proving to be a great source of entertainment. Irritated, the man calls the Lord arrogant and charges at him with full force, attempting to land a frontal sword strike, but Park dodges effortlessly. The protagonist merely watches, and suddenly, the hooded man feels a sharp pain in his injured arm, causing him to stop his attack. Then the man collapses to his knees as if he were about to make a proposal to his beloved lord. Lying on the ground, the hooded man looks up at Lan, who is holding his sword, still glowing with power, his expression one of complete indifference. Grabbing something from the ground, the man prepares to strike again. He throws sand directly into the lord's face just as Lan is about to attack, momentarily disrupting him. However, Lan still tries to complete his attack with his eyes closed, and the man barely manages to dodge the strike, which would have been fatal. After the failed attack, Park readies himself again, and on the ground, the hooded man grips his sword with both hands, preparing as well. Both stand up, charging directly at each other, their blue and red forces colliding once again. The intense clash generates a powerful shockwave as the two forces collide. With a calm smile, Lan mockingly asks the man if that's all he's got, and warns that if there's nothing else to show, he'll end it all right now. Surprised and a bit apprehensive, the hooded man curses at Lan, calling him crazy. In response, the protagonist intensifies his power, overwhelming the confrontation with his blue energy. Feeling pressured, the hooded man backs away in shock at the immense power he has just witnessed. But something else catches his attention. Suddenly, the hooded man sees Lan perform what seems like an invocation or illusion, with multiple swords floating in the air, each one imbued with blue energy. They all fly toward the imposter, who is now unsure of how he will defend against such an overwhelming attack. Frantically, the hooded man tries to fend off the swords, slashing repeatedly with his own weapon, still imbued with red energy. However, a mythical creature, composed entirely of blue force, emerges, and the man mutters in shock, wondering if this is the beast's blade. All the floating swords strike at once, severely wounding the man. His mask falls to the ground, shattered from the force of the blows. It turns out to be the noble who had been previously failing at forging weapons. The old man admits that the protagonist's strike was impressive. Badly injured and beaten, he asks the young lord who he is. Lan calmly responds, saying, "I am the Lord of Albaran." Falling to the ground, the man admits he never thought the Lord of Albaran would be this powerful. Lan then asks the man on the ground if he's alright. Sometime later in the same place, the protagonist is bandaging the wounded knight Mactero while asking if these attackers were from Croati. Mactero confirms this, explaining that a few years ago there was a conflict near their borders and many commanders were killed by Prince Joseph. Turning to Park, Mactero pleads for his help in saving Prince Joseph. With bright, almost childlike eyes, Mactero puts on an angelic expression, trying to convince the protagonist, who remains silent. Finally, Lan asks where Mactero became separated from Prince Joseph. Meanwhile, in another location, someone is holding a blood-stained sword. It's Prince Joseph, injured and visibly exhausted, breathing heavily from the physical effort. In the background, a voice remarks that he lasted quite a while. The prince is surrounded by several hooded men, who announce that this is the end for him. Annoyed, Joseph tells them to hurry up, as this situation is starting to irritate him. A mage, holding a staff imbued with magic, remarks that they know the prince is at his limit. Striking his staff on the ground, the mage chants a spell, releasing a powerful force. Suddenly, something crystalline begins to form on Joseph's chest, catching his attention. It's a freezing spell, trapping Prince Joseph inside a massive crystal of ice. The mage shouts for the hooded men to attack the prince. Joseph, still trapped, watches silently as a strange energy begins to emanate from his body. Within seconds, the ice surrounding him starts to crack as he grips his sword tightly. Moments later, the ice shatters completely, and the prince stands, holding two swords, both glowing with his blue energy. Turning to face his enemies, his expression is cold and murderous. As the hooded men prepare to strike from above, Joseph readies himself to counterattack. The moment the hooded figures touch the ground, a massive explosion of energy erupts, painting the entire horizon blue. From a distance, the mage watches silently. But something catches his attention, and he is suddenly filled with fear. He watches in horror as Prince Joseph disintegrates his men with pure energy, and the mage questions what kind of human he is. Afterward, Joseph begins coughing up blood, still significantly wounded from the battle. Looking at the mage, Joseph acknowledges that their attack this time was decent, and says he'll let them live, for now. But for that to happen, they must reveal who hired them. Trembling with fear, the mage remains silent, unable to speak. Continuing, Joseph says he plans to pay a visit to whoever hired them very soon. Irritated, the man growls that he won't be going anywhere until he kills the prince. Immediately after, he shouts for someone, calling out Lord Vinuvisa. In that moment, a surge of blue energy reaches the area. Balancing himself on a piece of wood, the man mutters that if he had been summoned sooner, he wouldn't have suffered so much. Curious, the prince asks if this is the man who hired Vinuvisa to kill him. The figure jumps down from the wooden structure. With his eyes closed and bowing slightly, Vinuvisa asks if the prince knows him. With a confident smirk, Joseph asks if he wasn't the one who got kicked out of the Iron Tower. Annoyed, the old man grabs his spear in response. While spinning the spear effortlessly with one hand, Venuvisa asks if there are rumors about him even in the kingdom of Bellarine, remarking that he's flattered. Pressing the spear, imbued with energy, into the ground, Venuvisa creates a massive crack in the earth. He tells the Prince of Bellarine that if he wishes to have his body intact when he dies, he should surrender his life now. With a sinister smile, he warns that otherwise there will be no body left for his funeral. Angered by this, Prince Joseph retorts that it's a pretty ugly thing to say, calling the man an old fool as he prepares his attack. In a flash, Joseph unleashes 2 beams of energy from his swords, each one glowing with his signature force. But Venuvisa smiles calmly, finding the attack impressive. Gripping his spear with both hands, Venuvisa remarks that while it's impressive, there's a catch. He counters with a massive burst of energy using only his spear. The overwhelming force rushes toward Prince Joseph, who barely manages to defend himself. Venuvisa comments that it seems the prince has finally faced a worthy opponent. His expression darkens as he unleashes another intense surge of energy with his spear. In reflex, Joseph uses his twin swords, glowing with power, to block and repel the incoming force. Crouching low, Joseph thinks to himself that this old man is indeed strong and that if he wasn't so exhausted from all the fighting up to this point, things might be different. In an instant, Joseph disappears, surprising the old man. Panting, Venuvisa wonders if there's any point in dying here. As he glances toward a nearby river, Joseph thinks about Mactero and Cyan, wondering where they are. While running toward the river, he suddenly feels a surge of energy close behind him. The blast hits the river, sending a massive spray of water into the sky. Nearly drowning, Joseph emerges, even more fatigued and worn down. Venuvisa approaches, taunting the prince, asking where he's running to and if he's abandoning his honor as a prince. At that moment, Joseph spots his sword in the water. Determined not to die like this, he reaches for his sword. Just as his hand gets close to the blade, he feels something strange. Looking up, he sees the protagonist Park standing illuminated by a light, holding a staff like some sort of savior. From below, Venuvisa stares at Park, puzzled by this stranger who has suddenly appeared in the battle. Confused, the old man asks the hooded figure, "Who are you?" Park drops the staff onto the ground instantly. He glares menacingly at Venuvisa, warning that if the old man doesn't disappear quietly, he'll meet the same fate as his men. Kneeling in the river, Prince Joseph recognizes the voice and wonders if it's truly the Lord. Holding his spear, Venuvisa snarls that this man killed his business, so he must have some skill. He unleashes an enormous amount of energy, shouting that he hasn't been paid for his services yet. In the river, Prince Joseph goes on high alert. The massive surge of energy starts to disrupt the river, creating enormous waves. Moments later, the waves settle, but neither Joseph nor Park are visible. Confused, Venuvisa wonders where they went. Suddenly, the protagonist teleports behind Venuvisa, using his ability to move instantly. He attempts a sneak attack, opting for a frontal strike with his energy-imbued sword, but the old man dodges just in time by ducking. Afterward, Venuvisa slams his spear into the ground with great force. He uses the momentum from the strike to launch himself forward, putting distance between himself and the protagonist. With this massive leap, Venuvisa soars high above the river, gaining even more altitude. From below, Park watches the old man ascend, just as he teleports once more. Holding his energy-imbued sword, the young lord calls out, asking the old man where he thinks he's going. After landing, the old man, clearly irritated, yells that he's not fleeing and calls Lan a brat. He explains that he's graciously giving the blonde a chance to escape and live since the client who ordered the job is already dead. With a deadly serious aura, Venuvisa bluntly states that he doesn't want to do anything without getting paid. Emerging from the river, Prince Joseph argues with the old man, asking him to let the protagonist go. Lan, confident in his abilities, tells the old man that he will graciously let him leave and commands Venuvisa to go immediately. Upon hearing this confident response, the old man grumbles something under his breath. Surprisingly, Venuvisa takes his leave, using his power and move quickly away. Exiting the river, completely battered and exhausted, Prince Joseph turns to Lan Albaran, expressing that he owes the Lord his life. Lowering his hood, Lan asks the prince if he's hurt, and Joseph admits that while he's injured, he's not at risk of dying. Joseph continues, stating that he can hardly believe how strong the Lord is, given what he witnessed. Curious, he asks if Lan has been deceiving the entire world all this time, pretending to be weak. A bit embarrassed, Lan laughs and says it wasn't intentional, but it did happen that way. Understanding, Joseph says they can leave that conversation for later. His expression serious, he mentions that he needs to find his missing subordinates immediately. With a calm smile, Lan reassures the prince, telling him not to worry as he knows where his subordinates are. Sometime later, near the battlefield from earlier, Cheyenne is tending to Mactero's wounds, telling him to stay still and endure it. Mactero, breathing heavily, responds that he's still breathing, which irritates Cheyenne. Furious, she yells at him to hold still, saying she needs to stitch him up so they can search for his highness together. Lying on the ground, Mactero comments that Lord Albaran went to find Joseph, so they should wait here. Annoyed, the red-haired woman calls him an idiot, saying that they should be the ones risking their lives to find the prince, not Lord Albaran. At that moment, a noise catches both of their attention and Mactero, despite his injuries, stands up to see what it is. Approaching them are Prince Joseph and Lord Lan Albaran, arriving on horseback, which instantly surprises Cyan and Mactero. Concerned, Joseph asks his subordinates if they are alright. In unison, they bow and respond, thanking the heavens that His Highness is safe. Relieved, Joseph confirms that he is, thanks to Lord Albaran, who rescued him from the situation. The two subordinates bow again, thanking Lan for saving the prince. Feeling a bit awkward, the protagonist humbly replies that he was just doing his duty, kindly asking them to lift their heads. However, in his mind, he secretly thinks he'd like to be paid in gold for what he did. At the same time, Prince Joseph orders his subordinates to mount their horses so they can leave the area, and they quickly comply. A short while later, and begin riding. The four of them gallop across the grassy fields in a beautiful scene, with Lan riding a different horse than the others. As they ride, Lan comments that from what he knows, Callan Fortress is nearby and asks if they should stop there to rest. However, Prince Joseph replies that they can't go there, prompting Lan to ask why. Looking back, Joseph explains that it's because the Grand Lord Rolmain is suspected of being directly involved in the recent attack. He further explains that the assassins from the three Crowdy families sent after him numbered at least a few hundred men, but Grand Lord Rolmain did nothing to intervene or send any kind of warning. Lan wonders aloud if the assassins could have infiltrated the land, disguising themselves as ordinary merchants. But Joseph questions whether someone as powerful as Grand Lord Rolmain, who sees and hears everything in the land, would have been unaware of this. This makes Park silently ponder whether he has unknowingly gotten involved in a conflict between the royal family and the Grand Lord. Meanwhile, at the palace of Grand Lord Rolmain, Rolmain is standing by a window, observing something outside. He comments to Flan that he doesn't seem very happy. Flan responds, disappointed that the useless bastards failed to kill Prince Joseph. Surprised, Lord Rolmain asks how they could fail, despite their large numbers, and inquires if Vinuvisa had participated as well. Flan confirms the information but mentions that something unexpected happened. Lord Rolmain asks what that could be. Flan begins explaining the situation, saying that reports indicate someone was assisting the prince and managed to defeat Vinuvisa. Even though Vinuvisa was expelled from the Iron Tower, he was a co-owner of it. Suspicious, Lord Rolmain questions who could possibly defeat the personal guard who once protected the leader of the Shaolin cult. Apologetically, Flan explains that his servants were only able to observe the individual from a distance and could not identify him due to the circumstances. Shifting the conversation slightly, Rolmain asks about Joseph's current location. Flan responds that the prince is heading toward the king's territory with an unidentified helper. Smiling, Lord Rolmain remarks that since Joseph didn't come to Callan Fortress, which is nearby, he must already be suspecting the entire plan. Flan adds that they've dealt with all the bodies and survivors from the Crowdy assassins to eliminate any trace of evidence against them. He then asks what they should do about Vinuvisa, noting that the old man left the forest and is resting at an inn. Lord Rolmain remains silent for a moment. He eventually responds, saying to leave Vinuvisa alone, that they have no reason to turn him into an enemy, and Flan agrees. Still deeply suspicious about the whole situation, Lord Rolmain begins to question who this unidentified helper could be. Sometime later, on a sunny day in a kingdom with a distinctly different architecture, the protagonist opens a door and steps into what looks like a luxurious hotel room. Prince Joseph is seated on a couch, reading something. Upon seeing Lan, the prince, while flipping through some papers, asks if he rested well last night. Smiling and apparently in good spirits, Lan Albaran responds that yes, he had a great night, mentioning he enjoyed a good dinner and slept well afterward. Lan then asks how Joseph is feeling, to which the prince replies that he's feeling much better after just one day, and that it was all thanks to Lan's help. Ever modest, Park responds that he was simply doing his duty, and Joseph smiles at the reply. With a more serious expression, Joseph closes his book and mentions that Cyan told him the Lord was preparing to leave. Lan confirms, explaining that he has things to attend to. Setting his book aside, the prince expresses regret that they'll have to part ways. At that moment, Cyan enters, carrying something. It's a box, which she brings to the protagonist. Surprised, Lan asks what it is, and Joseph urges him to open it. Cyan opens the mysterious box, revealing a golden artifact with a large emerald stone at its center. Seeing the item, Lan's jaw drops in astonishment, and he asks once again what he's looking at. Delighted, Joseph explains that it's a token of his gratitude, knowing that Lan didn't expect anything when he helped him. However, as a prince, he couldn't let him leave empty-handed. Staring at the artifact inside the box, Park is left speechless, overwhelmed by what he sees. Concerned, Joseph asks if the gift isn't to his liking. Lan, snapping out of his awe, responds that since it was sincerely prepared by His Highness, he will gladly accept it, which relieves the prince. After their conversation, the two begin walking outside the establishment, with Joseph still sporting an apparently broken arm. As they walk, the prince comments that unlike other lords, Lan is a descendant of one of the kingdom's founding contributors, and he believes this carries significant weight. Continuing, Joseph admits that while he isn't interested in politics and isn't particularly fond of his older brother, the first Prince Twel, he opposes the idea of dividing the kingdom under the pretense of supporting a better king, which would inevitably lead to war. Looking out over his kingdom, Joseph reflects that the damage caused by war would be felt by the citizens, not by those encouraging it. At this moment, Park expresses his agreement with Joseph's sentiment. Joseph then remarks that while he doesn't know the urgency of Lan's affairs, he hopes the Lord will fulfill his duties and return to his territories safely. Laughing, Lan advises Joseph to take care as well. With a cheerful tone, the prince reminds Lan not to forget that he'll be waiting for him at the palace with a great drink. In response, the protagonist assures him that he'll remember. Cyan calls out to Lan, informing him that she's prepared a horse for him outside. The two begin descending the stairs, and Cyan thanks the Lord for saving the prince, saying that they will be eternally indebted to him. Feeling a bit awkward after Cyan's thanks, Park comments that His Highness is fortunate to have such loyal servants like her and Mactero by his side. Embarrassed, the red-haired woman denies it. As he approaches his horse, he sees Mactero waiting for him. Overjoyed, the knight enthusiastically shakes Lan's hand, bidding him farewell and expressing his hope to see him again someday. Mounting his horse, the Lord nods and bids them goodbye before riding off swiftly. Excited, Cyan remarks that Lan is an incredible man, and Mactero agrees, adding that he truly understands the meaning of loyalty. Later, Lan Albaran arrives at a luxurious shop. Showing the bracelet he received, he asks the appraiser how much it's worth. Taking the item in his hands, the appraiser begins examining it, mentioning that it will cost 2 silver coins for the evaluation. Within seconds, the man looks completely shocked by what he sees, catching the attention of a guard in the background. Holding the item, the appraiser explains that the bracelet is large enough to cover the entire wrist, suggesting it's from ancient times. He also comments on the precious gemstones embedded in it. After a detailed analysis of the bracelet, Lan simply asks how much it's worth. The appraiser responds that it's worth at least 3,000 gold coins due to its rarity. Hearing this, Lan is astonished by the high value, far more than he expected. Curious, the appraiser asks where Lan found such an item. Park tosses 2 silver coins as payment for the evaluation. Humming to himself, Lan thinks this item is even more valuable than he imagined. However, something catches his eye. Looking back, he notices 2 men staring at him. One of the men questions where the boy got the bracelet, implying that his master is curious. Accusing him of stealing it, the man offers 10 gold coins in exchange for Lan leaving the item behind and walking away. Fed up with the situation, the protagonist begins pulling up his hood. Lan remarks that he thought this region being directly controlled by the king would be different, but it seems there's trash everywhere. Enraged, the man shouts, asking what that bastard just said. Lan remains calm, showing no emotion. The man rushes toward Lan to attack him. Without hesitation, Park lands a direct uppercut on the man. After delivering the blow, Lan turns swiftly, moving toward the man's companion, striking him in the face as well. One of the other observers draws his sword, calling Lan a cursed brat. He charges at the hooded boy, determined to end the fight. In a split second, Lan disarms the man by striking his arm. The sword flies toward the appraiser, who senses something coming his way. The sword grazes the appraiser's head, cutting some of his hair, leaving him utterly confused and in pain. The man begins screaming in agony. Realizing that Lan had effortlessly defeated all the attackers, the appraiser begins trembling in fear. Stammering, the appraiser begs for forgiveness, explaining that he thought the boy had stolen the item. Park, unimpressed, asks if that's the excuse the man is going with. Offering some valuable item, the appraiser pleads with Lan not to hurt him. Smiling menacingly, Lan responds that if he takes the bribe, the appraiser would just report him. Still terrified, the man insists that's not the case. In response, Lan delivers a punch straight to the man's face. Irritated, Lan says that he was leaving happily, but these idiots had to go and annoy him. After cleaning up the shop, Lan calmly walks out. In a distant snowy land, strong winds blow alongside the falling snow. Several mountaineers are climbing a large mountain. One of them, while pulling on a rope, notices something. He shouts to his leader that he's found an empty space in the ice. From above, the leader hears what his subordinate said. He instructs one of them to step aside. Carefully observing the empty space in the ice, the leader prepares to punch the icy wall. With a powerful blow, the wall shatters, revealing a passage. The man decides to enter. As he walks deeper into the icy wall, the scene shifts to a village in the middle of the snow. 2 men are sitting inside having a conversation. The man from before bursts into the giant cabin, announcing that he found something, startling the 2 men at the table. One of the men, shocked, asks if it's true. The mountaineer insists that he saw it with his own eyes and that this time it's real. Standing up, the archer tells his colleague that they should go check it out. The 3 of them arrive at what appears to be a frozen cave. They proceed deeper and deeper inside. Reaching the location, the mountaineer presents what he has found. He tries to illuminate the area with his torch, but the light is insufficient. With an arrogant tone, the mage orders him to step aside. Conjuring a spell, the mage calls for the first light to reveal itself. A tremendous amount of energy floods the cave, revealing a massive dragon encased in ice. One of the men is completely awestruck, exclaiming how incredible it is. Overjoyed, he comments that they finally found a dragon, and his colleague adds that if anyone discovered it, they would be ecstatic. The man then asks how long they've been searching for this. Frustrated with the long search, the mage responds that it's been a very long time. He then explains that all that remains is to find the dragon's heart. Meanwhile, outside in the icy mountains, the wind continues to howl, accompanied by snow. Suddenly, the protagonist, Lan, teleports to this towering mountain. Shielding his eyes with his hand, he remarks that the distortion's effectiveness isn't much as his vision is blurred by the snowstorm. Letting go of his hand, he wonders if this is Deef Mountain, recalling that the merchant from Karmu mentioned seeing Minnan somewhere in this area. Shivering from the cold, Lan mutters that Minnan will be dead when he finds him. Opening his bag, he sees 2 of those warm stones. Rubbing them on his face, he comments on how warm they are, serving as hand warmers. Suddenly, the spirit interjects, saying she's sure there's a reason the stones are so warm. In response, Lan sarcastically remarks that it must be nice, since she can't feel the cold, which annoys the spirit. After some time, Lan continues walking through the mountain. After a long trek, he spots a village nestled in the snow. Entering the village, he walks through it, but everything appears empty. Eventually, he arrives at a bar. Inside, the bartender asks what he can do for him, and Lan orders anything to fill his belly and a bottle of drink. Suspicious, Lan asks if the man isn't charging too much for it. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.